Ancient Egypt, a civilization born of the life-giving waters of the Nile and overshadowed by the scorching sun of the desert, has been fascinating the minds of researchers, historians, and just lovers of riddles for thousands of years. Its pyramids that point skyward like bridges between worlds, its mummies that preserve the appearance of long-gone rulers, its hieroglyphs that tell about gods, wars, and everyday life. All this is just the tip of the iceberg of an incredible, complex, and rich culture. However, behind the brilliance of gold and the monumentality of stone, there are many questions that still haunt scientists, forcing them to review, analyze, and search for answers where, it would seem, everything has long been studied. These questions, like desert dunes shifting in the wind of time, constantly open up new horizons for research, turning each archaeological layer into another page full of unsolved mysteries. We know the names of pharaohs, gods, and grand viziers, read their letters and chronicles, studied their way of life and beliefs. Nevertheless, even after centuries of careful study, ancient Egypt continues to contain mysteries that cannot be clearly explained within a framework of generally accepted scientific paradigms. Some of them relate to engineering miracles that seemed impossible for the technology of that era. Others, strange artifacts that are out of context. Still others, unexplained events or disappearances. There are also puzzles related to the unusual knowledge of the Egyptians, their philosophy, and of course, their funeral rites, which sometimes seem too complex or strange to be just a tribute to tradition. For some, these riddles are evidence of lost technologies or outside help. For others, they are only the result of an incomplete understanding of ancient methods and thought. But regardless of the interpretations, they continue to excite the imagination, turning the study of ancient Egypt into an endless journey through Thelebirantum of time, where each answer gives rise to new, even deeper questions. In this book, we will dive into the most intriguing of these mysteries, try to shed light on their essence, and consider the various hypotheses that try to solve them, realizing that not all questions have ready answers, and this is their true charm and eternal appeal. The Great Pyramids of Giza, the stone cosmos, and the limits of ancient technology. Among all the wonders of ancient Egypt, nothing causes such awe and so many questions as the Great Pyramids of Giza, especially the Pyramid of Cheops, Khufu, the oldest and only preserved of the 7 wonders of the world. Towering over the desert sands, these colossal structures are the pinnacle of the architectural and engineering genius of the ancient Egyptians, but at the same time remain the source of countless mysteries that challenge the modern understanding of technology at that time. How these monuments were built, consisting of millions of limestone and granite blocks, some of which weigh tens or even hundreds of tons, and how they were raised to such an incredible height remains the subject of ongoing debate and speculation. Traditional Egyptology explains the construction of the pyramids using a combination of ramps, levers, rollers, and a huge army of workers, who apparently were not slaves, but skilled builders and farmers who worked during the Nile flood season. It is believed that the blocks were cut down in quarries, mainly Turian limestone for facing, and local limestone for internal masonry, as well as Aswan granite for internal chambers and sarcophagi, then transported along the Nile to the construction site, and then moved along inclined ramps to the place of laying. However, when it comes to details, the traditional theory faces serious difficulties. What exactly was the shape of the ramp? Was it straight, spiral, or was it a series of internal ramps? For a straight ramp to reach the top of the Pyramid of Cheops, which has a height of about 146 meters, initially, it would require an incredible length, several kilometers, which would make its volume larger than that of the pyramid itself, and would require an incredible amount of material and labor for construction and dismantling. If it was a spiral ramp, how did the workers move and flip the huge blocks at the corners? In addition, the precise fit of the blocks, especially the exterior cladding, which today is almost completely lost, but remains show an amazing accuracy, where the gaps between the stones are millimeters, is amazing. How was this achieved without modern tools, lasers, and precise measuring instruments? Another great mystery is connected with the inner rooms and the sarcophagus in the king's chamber. This granite sarcophagus, carved from a single piece of granite, impresses with the precision of its internal and external surfaces. How was it turned if it is so hard that modern granite is processed only with the help of diamond tools? Its dimensions are such that it could not be carried through the narrow passages of the pyramid after its completion, which means that it was placed there during construction, which complicates logistics. Questions arise about the purpose of so-called ventilation shafts in the chamber of the king and queen, which are directed to certain stars, Sirius, Alnitak, in the Orion Belt, Kohab and Tuban. Some suggest that these were not just ventilation ducts, but astronomical telescopes or symbolic paths for the soul of Pharaon to the heavenly bodies. However, their extremely small size and complex trajectory, sometimes changing the angle, make their functional purpose ambiguous. In addition to the technological aspects, there is also the mystery of the location of the pyramids. Their orientation to the cardinal directions with amazing accuracy, surpassing the capabilities of even modern methods without GPS. The north side of the Pyramid of Cheops deviates from true north by only 3 arc minutes, which is an incredible achievement for that time. How did the Egyptians achieve such accuracy using only astronomical observations? They may have used circumpolar stars, but their alignment methods remain a matter of debate. Finally, there is the hypothesis of a water elevator, or hydraulic transport, proposed by some researchers as an alternative to ramps, but it also faces its own technical difficulties and the lack of direct archaeological evidence. Taken together, these questions about the grandeur of scale, the amazing precision of stone processing, and the mysterious interior elements make the Great Pyramids not just tombs, but monuments that continue to challenge our understanding of the ancient world's capabilities, making us wonder about hidden knowledge or lost technologies. The Sphinx, the mystery of its age and forgotten water tracks. Next to the Great Pyramids of Giza, the majestic Great Sphinx of Giza stands like an eternal guardian, a colossal statue of a mythical creature with the body of a lion and the head of a man, carved out of solid rock. This is one of the most recognizable images of ancient Egypt, but it is also perhaps one of the most mysterious of its relics, whose history and age have been hidden for centuries, and its origin causes fierce disputes among scientists. Official Egyptology attributes the creation of the Sphinx to Pharaoh Khafre, the builder of the second largest pyramid on the Giza Plateau, and dates its creation to about 2500 BC. However, a number of unconventional studies and geological data call this dating into question, pointing to a much older origin, which in turn completely changes the idea of the development of ancient Egyptian civilization. The main mystery of the Sphinx is the erosion of its body and the walls of the surrounding quarry. Unlike the pyramids, which are mostly exposed to wind erosion, sand, the body of the Sphinx and the walls of the quarry from which it was carved show clear signs of water erosion, manifested in vertical furrows and deep undulating depressions. This rain erosion, as some researchers call it, looks significantly different from typical wind erosion, which leaves horizontal stripes and smooth, polished surfaces. The problem is that the Giza Plateau has not had heavy rains capable of causing such erosion over the past 5,000 to 7,000 years. The last period of heavy rainfall in Egypt, the so-called Green Sahara or Wet Holocene, ended about 7,000 to 9,000 years ago, when the Sahara was a savanna and the climate of Egypt was much wetter. If the water erosion on the Sphinx is genuine and significant, then this means that the Sphinx must have been created before this period. That is, much earlier than the official Egyptology dates it. 7,000 Takarns, 10,000 years ago or even earlier. Such a date, if correct, would make the Sphinx significantly older than any known Egyptian civilization, raising the question of who and for what purpose could have created such a monumental structure thousands of years before the pharaohs. Another aspect of the puzzle is related to the head of the Sphinx. Some researchers, including forensic experts, have argued that the head is disproportionately small in relation to the body and may have been recycled from the original head, which may have been the head of a lion or some other animal. If the body of the Sphinx is much older than is commonly believed, and the head was added or altered by Pharaoh Khafre, this would explain the disparity and allow the various dates to be reconciled. However, Egyptologists insist that the head and body are one and were created at the same time. Additional questions are caused by the absence of any inscriptions or references to the Sphinx in Egyptian texts from the time of the ancient kingdom, when presumably it was built. If it was such a grandiose structure created by Khafra, why is there no hieroglyphic record that would directly indicate its creator or purpose? Only a year later, during the New Kingdom, does Thutmose I's Stele of Sleep appear, where the Sphinx is already represented as an ancient, sand-covered deity. The mysteries surrounding the age, origin, and supposed water erosion of the Sphinx cast doubt on many well-established ideas about the chronology of ancient Egyptian civilization. If the Sphinx is indeed older than the pyramids and pharaohs, it means that there was a certain, now unknown, highly developed culture on the Giza Plateau, capable of creating monumental structures long before dynastic Egypt. This assumption challenges the entire accepted history of civilization and is one of the most heavily contested riddles that still has no definitive solution, continuing to fuel both scientific research and alternative theories. The Amarna Enigma, the heretic on the throne, and the vanished capital. Among the bright pages of ancient Egyptian history, there is a period that, like a mirage, appears and disappears, leaving behind more questions than answers. This is the Amarna period, associated with the reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten, originally Amenhotep IV, who ruled Egypt alone from about 1353 to 1336 BC during the New Kingdom era. His reign was so radical and unusual in the millennia-old Egyptian tradition that it still causes controversy and confusion. Akhenaten did more than just carry out a religious reform. In fact, he tried to turn the entire Egyptian cosmology and social structure upside down, proclaiming the cult of the one god, Aten, the solar disk, and rejecting the 1,000-year-old main god Amun, and with it the entire vast pantheon of Egyptian gods. The main mystery of the Amarna period lies in the nature and causes of such a radical religious revolution, as well as in the mysterious disappearance and subsequent oblivion of the new capital, Akhenaten, horizon of the Aten, now known as Amarna. Why did the pharaoh, who grew up in a traditional polytheistic environment, suddenly decide to introduce monotheism, which was completely alien to the Egyptian mentality of that time? Was it a sincere religious conviction, or was it a political move aimed at weakening the powerful priesthood of Amun, which by then had accumulated enormous wealth and influence, competing even with the power of the pharaoh? Some researchers suggest that Akhenaten may have been a prophet who was ahead of his time, perhaps even the first carrier of the idea of a single god in history. Others see it as an attempt to concentrate all power, both secular and spiritual, in the hands of the pharaoh. However, the result was social and political instability. After declaring Aten the only god, Akhenaten closed the temples of the other gods, confiscated their property, and ordered their names and images erased from all monuments. The most striking symbol of this revolution was the construction of a new, completely new capital, Akhenaten, built from scratch in the desert, far from the traditional centers of power and priesthood. This capital, built surprisingly quickly, featured a unique, innovative style of art known as the Amarna style, which was much more realistic and even caricatured than traditional idealized Egyptian art. Famous reliefs and statues depict the pharaoh himself, his beautiful wife Nefertiti, and their daughters in unusually intimate and natural poses, with elongated skulls and rounded bellies, which causes a lot of controversy about the possible physical features of the royal family. However, soon after Akhenaten's death, his religious revolution was completely canceled. His successors, including Tutankhamun, originally Tutankhaten, quickly reverted to the cult of Amun and the traditional gods. Akhenaten's name was removed from the royal lists, his monuments were destroyed, and his capital, Akhenaten, was abandoned. It was abandoned so quickly that archaeologists find remnants of everyday life there, as if the city was suddenly deserted. Why was this city so quickly forgotten and never used again? Perhaps it was cursed as a heretic city, or it turned out to be unpractical in terms of logistics and resources. The mystery of Amarna is how such radical changes could have occurred in such a conservative civilization, why they were so quickly and decisively reversed, and why all the memory of the heretic pharaoh was so thoroughly erased from history that his image remained unknown until the 19th century. This event shows a deep internal crisis in Egyptian society and the power of tradition, which eventually defeated even the will of the pharaoh. The secret of the pyramid builders. Who, how, and why? The question of who built the pyramids is as old as the pyramids themselves. For many centuries, there was a misconception, perpetuated by the Greek historian Herodotus and biblical traditions, that these monuments were created by slaves exhausted under the scorching sun. However, modern archaeological discoveries and scientific research completely refute this view, revealing a new, much more complex and intriguing picture. If the pyramids were not built by slaves, then who were these people who had such tremendous knowledge and organizational abilities? And how did they manage to create such colossal structures without modern technology? This mystery is especially relevant for the Great Pyramids of Giza, where the scale of construction is amazing. Recent archaeological excavations conducted near the Giza Plateau have revealed the remains of entire builder cities that were located directly at the foot of the pyramids. These cities were vast settlements with residential neighborhoods, bakeries, breweries, butchers, fish farms, medical facilities, and even cemeteries. The skeletons found show that the builders were well-fed, skilled workers who received medical attention in case of injuries, which is completely different from the image of exhausted slaves. These people were probably free Egyptian farmers who worked on the construction of the pyramids during the flood seasons of the Nile, when agricultural work was impossible. This work was probably considered an honorable and religious duty to the pharaoh and the gods, a form of taxation or collective bargaining. However, the scale of these cities, which could accommodate tens of thousands of people, suggests the need for unprecedented organization and logistics to supply and manage so many people. How was the food, water, and material supply system organized for such a huge project? In addition to the question of who built it, no less important is the question of how they did it. The technical details of moving and installing millions of stone blocks remain not fully understood. Despite numerous theories about ramps, straight, spiral, internal, and levers, none of them provides a complete and exhaustive answer that would take into account all the engineering difficulties in archaeological data. For example, the transportation of huge granite blocks weighing tens of tons from Aswan, more than 800 kilometers, required incredible efforts and special ships capable of withstanding such a storm, especially in the conditions of the Nile currents. How were these blocks lifted onto ships and unloaded? Another mystery is the precise measurement and alignment. How did the Egyptians achieve such incredible accuracy in the orientation of the pyramids to the cardinal directions and in leveling the huge bases, which cover an area of several hectares at an almost perfect level, using only primitive tools and astronomical observations? It is assumed that they could have used star alignment, water level, and plumb lines, but achieving such accuracy without modern optical instruments remains amazing. There is also the question of quarries and methods of stone extraction. How did they cut down huge blocks of hard rock, such as granite, without iron tools? Did you use copper tools, which quickly become blunt, dolerite balls for impact processing, or some unknown methods? And why, after the construction of the A pyramids, did this grandiose engineering tradition seem to fade away? Although the pyramids continued to be built, they were significantly smaller in size and much poorer in quality, indicating a loss or change in technology and organizational capabilities. The mystery of the pyramid builders, then, goes far beyond the simple question of labor. It concerns the depth of the scientific and engineering knowledge of the ancient Egyptians, their ability to organize work on an unprecedented scale, and the reasons why these achievements might not have been further developed on the same scale. The Curse of the Pharaohs, Ancient Warnings and Modern Cases. For decades, if not centuries, the history of ancient Egypt has been accompanied by the sinister and intriguing concept of the Curse of the Pharaohs. This idea, which was widely spread after the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, states that anyone who disturbs the peace of the ancient rulers or their graves will be struck by an unknown force, leading to misfortune, illness, or even death. Although most scholars dismiss this as superstition and an exaggeration based on coincidence, The very fact that such a legend has emerged in its persistence over such a long period of time makes us wonder about its roots and why it has become so firmly ingrained in the mass consciousness, continuing to cause alarm even among the most skeptical researchers. The main mystery of the curse lies in its immaterial nature and the lack of direct evidence, but at the same time in the presence of a number of amazing coincidences that feed the legend. The most famous case is associated with the tomb of Tutankhamun. When Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon discovered the pristine tomb of the young pharaoh, a series of mysterious deaths and misfortunes befell the expedition members, and their families soon followed. Lord Carnarvon, who financed the excavation, died just a few months after the tomb was opened from a mosquito bite that became inflamed, which many people thought was too fast and a strange coincidence. At the same time, the lights went out in his house, and his beloved terrier died of a heart attack. Other members of the team and their relatives also died under unusual circumstances, some from fever, some from unknown illnesses, and some committed suicide. In total, according to popular estimates, about 20 people associated with the discovery of the tomb died within 10 years. Although all these cases can be attributed to natural causes or coincidences, their concentration in time and around a single event creates an aura of mystery that is not yet dissipated. In addition to Tutankhamun's tomb, stories of curses surround other Egyptian burial sites and artifacts. For example, it is believed that mummies taken out of Egypt and displayed in museums can bring misfortune. Even those who don't believe in the supernatural are wondering how to explain the powerful psychological impact of this idea. Is it possible that the ancient Egyptians, having a deep knowledge of psychology and suggestion, created some psychological traps for looters, using threats of curses and inscriptions that then subconsciously influenced those who invaded the shrines? Or more scientifically, could mummies in ancient tombs contain deadly bacteria, fungi, or spores that once sealed for thousands of years were released upon opening, causing illness to those who inhaled them? However, there is no direct evidence of such pathogens capable of causing such specific and diverse effects. The mystery of the curse of the pharaohs lies not only in the attempt to explain the sequence of deaths and misfortunes, but also in why this very idea is so deeply embedded in the collective consciousness. Perhaps this is a reflection of our own fear of the unknown, of the violation of ancient taboos, or it is evidence that the ancient Egyptians possessed knowledge that goes beyond our current understanding. Whether it is psychology or even some form of hidden biological weapons. Located at the intersection of history, psychology, and folklore, this mystery continues to intrigue, evoking the deep respect that the ancient Egyptians had for death in the afterlife, and how they sought to protect their eternal abodes from any invasion. Forgotten gold mines, the source of inexhaustible wealth and its disappearance. Ancient Egypt was inextricably linked to gold. Throughout their history, from the earliest dynasties to the last days of the pharaohs, gold has played a central role in their economy, religion, art, and politics. It symbolized the divine immortality and power of the pharaoh, who was often called the Golden Mountain. Gold was used for making funerary masks, sarcophagi, statues of gods and pharaohs, jewelry, religious objects, as well as a means of exchange and diplomatic gifts. Colossal amounts of gold found in tombs, especially in the tomb of Tutankhamun, and mentioned in ancient texts indicate the presence of the richest gold mines. However, the exact location and methods of exploitation of most of these golden mountains, which it would seem should have been inexhaustible, remain one of the intriguing mysteries that challenge modern research. The main problem is that although ancient Egyptian texts, such as the Turin Map Papyrus, the oldest known geological map, indicate the presence of gold mines in Nubia, modern-day Sudan, and the eastern desert of Egypt, most of these mines today are either not found or their scale does not correspond to the volume of gold that is currently being mined in the region, as you know, was in circulation among the ancient Egyptians. Ancient texts describe entire golden lands and promise untold riches. There is even a famous letter from the king of Mitanni to Pharaoh Amenhotep III, where he jokingly remarks that in Egypt, there is as much gold as sand. Where were these inexhaustible sources, and why did many of them disappear or run out today? One hypothesis is that the Egyptians used mostly alluvial gold, gold that is found in river sand and gravel. This method of extraction, although less expensive in terms of equipment, quickly depletes surface deposits, and the field becomes unprofitable. Perhaps this is how many easily accessible gold placers were developed. However, there is also evidence of mining operations where gold was extracted from quartz veins. Some remains of ancient mines have been found in the eastern desert, but they seem too small to explain all the richness of Egypt. Where were the larger main sources located? There is also a question about gold mining technologies. How could the ancient Egyptians, without modern equipment, have mined gold on such a huge scale? Did they use some unknown methods of rock grinding, washing, or even chemical treatment? Working conditions in the gold mines were extremely harsh, often deadly, as evidenced by Greek and Roman authors describing the work of convicts in terrible conditions. This could be one of the factors why such places were quickly depleted and abandoned. The mystery of forgotten gold mines goes beyond the simple search for deposits. It addresses the scale of the ancient mining industry, its organization, technology, and perhaps even the environmental impact that led to the depletion of resources and their subsequent oblivion. The search for these golden mountains continues, and each new discovery can shed light not only on the economic power of ancient Egypt, but also on its ability to large-scale development of natural resources, which still causes surprise and questions. The Temple of Seti in Abydos, a riddle of lost hieroglyphs and unknown technologies. Among the many magnificent temple complexes of ancient Egypt, a special place is occupied by the Temple of Pharaoh Seti in Abydos, built during the New Kingdom period, approximately in 1290-1279 BC. Dedicated to Osiris, the god of the afterlife, and 7 other major deities, this temple impresses with its sophisticated architecture, beautifully preserved reliefs, and exquisite paintings that are considered one of the best in Egyptian art. However, it is in this temple that one of the most intriguing and widely discussed mysteries is hidden, which challenges the traditional understanding of ancient technology and even chronology. So-called helicopter hieroglyphs, or Abydos hieroglyphs, as well as alleged evidence of stone processing that seems incompatible with the tools of that era. The main mystery is centered on one of the doorways of the temple, where it would seem that objects are depicted that surprisingly resemble modern technological devices, a helicopter, a submarine, and something that looks like an airplane or airship. These images, located on a high frieze, have become the subject of endless disputes and interpretations. Proponents of alternative theories immediately saw them as evidence of either paleo contact, visiting Earth by extraterrestrials in ancient times, or evidence that the ancient Egyptians possessed incomparably more advanced technologies than is commonly believed, technologies that were then lost. Some even claim that it could be images of time machines or visions of the future. However, Egyptologists offer a different, more prosaic, but no less interesting explanation: palimpsest, or superposition of hieroglyphs. In ancient Egypt, it was common practice to redo inscriptions, especially when one pharaoh tried to erase the memory of his predecessor or add his name to an existing monument. In the case of Abydos, it is assumed that the original inscription of Seti was partially erased, and then a new inscription of his son, Ramesses II, was carved in its place. The combination of remnants of an old inscription and a partially carved new one, in a certain light and at a certain angle, creates an optical illusion of these modern images. This explanation requires a very detailed analysis of individual characters and their superimposition on each other. But even it does not always fully satisfy curiosity, especially when you look at the images and see the obvious outlines of the technique. The unusual nature of these hieroglyphs, coupled with their location in a sacred temple, continues to fuel debate. In addition to the helicopter hieroglyphs, the Abydos temple and other Egyptian structures give rise to mysteries related to the processing of hard stones. Inside the temple and in nearby Osirian, granite blocks in sarcophagi have been found that are carved and polished with such incredible precision that it looks as if they were processed using high-speed drills or laser cutters. Perfectly smooth surfaces, right-angled internal angles, and drilling marks that don't match copper, Tools make you wonder what tools and methods the Egyptians used to achieve such amazing precision in working with granite, diorite, and other materials. Basalt, one of the hardest rocks on Earth? Traditional Egyptology attributes this to the use of abrasive materials, such as quartz sand, as well as hard work and time, but many engineers and stonecutters question the possibility of achieving such quality without technologies significantly superior to primitive ones. For example, the famous Egyptian drill bits used to create perfect cylindrical holes in stone leave traces that are difficult to explain by manual rotation. In Osirian, a mysterious underground structure located behind the temple of Seti-Thermer, there are huge monolithic granite blocks that are assembled with such precision that it is impossible to put a knife blade between them, which resembles the construction style found in South America, rather than the typical Egyptian masonry. These mysteries, whether optical illusions or evidence of lost knowledge, continue to inspire research and provoke debate about the true level of technological development of the ancient Egyptians. Gray ghosts, anomalies in the royal lists and forgotten pharaohs. The official chronology of ancient Egypt, carefully compiled from royal lists, annals, and archaeological finds, seems strikingly complete and continuous over thousands of years. However, a deeper look reveals mysterious gray zones in this seemingly stale picture, periods shrouded in darkness and rulers whose existence is confirmed only fragmentary or even absent from the main sources. These anomalies in the royal lists, whether they are missing fragments, cryptic intervals, or names that the pharaohs of subsequent dynasties tried to erase, call into question the completeness of our knowledge of ancient Egyptian history and point to the existence of forgotten pharaohs or entire dynasties whose stories were lost or deliberately erased from memory. One of the most famous and still intriguing anomalies is related to the absence of the names of some rulers in the main royal lists, such as the Turin Papyrus, the Abydos list of kings, or the Saqqara list. For example, after the reign of Akhenaten and his immediate successors, Tutankhamun and Eye, some official lists follow the names of pharaohs who preceded the Amarna period, completely ignoring the heretic pharaoh and his court. This was a deliberate erasure of memory, damnatio memoriae, aimed at eliminating any mention of a monarch who dared to encroach on thousands of years of religious foundations. However, in addition to such purposeful exceptions, there are other, less explicable gaps. Why are some dynasties that archaeological evidence shows had real power mentioned only in passing or not at all in the main royal lists? Perhaps this is due to regional peculiarities or political reasons, when some rulers were not recognized as legitimate authorities in other parts of Egypt. Especially mysterious are the transitional periods in Egypt's history, such as the first, second, and third transitional periods. These eras are characterized by political fragmentation, civil wars, and the rule of many small pharaohs who could control only small parts of the country. Later royal lists often have difficulty accurately recording these disparate reigns, resulting in significant gaps and uncertainty in chronology. How many pharaohs ruled simultaneously? What were their names? What was their duration of rule? The answers to these questions are often absent or extremely fragmentary, leaving historians with ghosts, names that appear in one source but are absent in another, or names that are not confirmed archaeologically at all. For example, many of the so-called mysterious kings of the second transition period remain only hypothetical figures whose tombs and monuments have not yet been found. Another intriguing mystery is related to the early dynasties and the so-called pre-dynasties, the period preceding the unification of Egypt under the rule of Pharaoh Menes, Yenmina. There are references to scorpion kings and other pre-dynastic rulers whose tombs and attributes of power have been found, but their names and the sequence of their rule remain extremely fragmentary and controversial. There may have been entire generations of rulers whose names were never recorded or whose records were lost forever. The mystery of the gray ghosts is not just an academic puzzle for Egyptologists. It raises fundamental questions about the nature of historical memory, how official chronicles are formed and distorted, and how many more unknown pages are hidden in the sands of Egypt, waiting to be discovered. The search for these forgotten pharaohs and the reconstruction of their rule continues to be one of the main directions of modern Egyptology. gradually filling in the gaps in the great chronicle of the ancient world. Unsolved mysteries of mummification, conservation secrets, and lost techniques. Mummification is perhaps one of the most iconic and intriguing practices of ancient Egypt, representing the pinnacle of their knowledge of anatomy, chemistry, and religious beliefs. The desire for eternal life and the preservation of the body for the afterlife led the Egyptians to develop an incredibly complex and lengthy process that lasted up to 70 days. We know the basic steps of mummification: removing the internal organs, except for the heart, drying the body with sodium, treating it with incense and resins, and then carefully swaddling it in hundreds of meters of linen bandages. However, despite extensive research and even attempts to reconstruct this process in modern times, many details and especially some amazing results of mummification remain unexplained mysteries that challenge our understanding of ancient technologies and materials. One of the main unsolved problems is the composition and methods of using embalming substances. Ancient Egyptian texts are very vague about the resins, oils, and herbs used. Although archaeologists have found samples of some of these substances, the full recipe and exact proportions remain unknown. How did the Egyptians achieve such an amazing degree of tissue preservation that even after thousands of years, some mummies look almost intact, and their facial features and even fingerprints remain recognizable? Of particular interest are the so-called black mummies of the New Kingdom, which are covered with a thick layer of black, shiny, glass-like substance. Its chemical composition is still controversial. Some suggest that it was a mixture of resin, wax, and grease, but how it was applied and why it was so well preserved remains a mystery. Did the Egyptians have any special chemical processes that allowed them to create such resistant preservatives that we do not know about? Another intriguing mystery is brain mummification. Although most internal organs were removed, the brain was often left behind or removed through the nose using special hooks. However, some mummies show surprisingly well-preserved brain tissue, which contradicts the generally accepted idea that the brain usually collapsed or leaked out. How exactly did the Egyptians manage this process? Were there any special methods to preserve this delicate organ, despite its high humidity and tendency to decompose? Recent studies also show that the Egyptians used the antibacterial and antifungal properties of certain resins and oils, which indicates a deep knowledge in the field that today we would call microbiology. But how did they discover these properties and how systematically did they apply them? In addition to the technological aspects, there are also mysteries related to religious justification and symbolism mummification. Why exactly was such a complex and expensive process necessary to reach the afterlife? What specific rituals and spells were chanted during each stage? And what role did they play in reviving the mummy in the world of the dead? Some mummy have been found with golden tongues, artificial eyes made of obsidian, or even implants. Was it an attempt to restore the integrity of the body or a symbolic giving of divine qualities to them? Finally, there is the mystery of ghost pharaohs. Mummies whose faces or bodies bear traces of unimaginable suffering, damage, or even unusual physiological features that have not yet been explained. Overall, mummification is not only evidence of a belief in an afterlife, but also a treasure trove of unsolved mysteries concerning ancient scientific knowledge, conservation techniques, and a deep understanding of the human body that may have been much more advanced than we imagine. Mysterious artifacts, the Baghdad Battery, the Dendera, and forgotten knowledge. Ancient Egypt, in addition to its monumental structures and mummies, left behind a number of artifacts that seemed to go beyond the usual understanding of technology at the time, sparking heated debates and giving rise to theories about forgotten knowledge or even alien intervention. These misplaced artifacts, as they are sometimes called, are intriguing puzzles that challenge established beliefs about the level of development of ancient Egyptian civilization. Although most of them have more or less acceptable scientific explanations, the unusual nature of their form and intended purpose continues to intrigue. One of the most famous such artifacts, although found in Iraq, but often mentioned in the context of Egyptian mysteries because of its alleged technological purpose, is the Baghdad Battery. Discovered in the 1930s, the object is an earthenware vessel with a copper cylinder inside and an iron rod inside, with the entire structure sealed with bitumen. Experiments have shown that when a vessel is filled with akhenatic solution, for example, grape juice, it is actually able to generate a small electric current. If it really was a galvanic battery, then what was it used for in ancient times? Proponents of alternative theories suggest that it could be used for electroplating metals, applying a thin layer of gold or silver to less valuable metals, for electrotherapy, or even to create light in dark rooms, such as tombs, where there are no traces of soot from torches. However, archaeologists are skeptical about the idea that it was a battery. More likely, it was a scroll container or a ritual object. But the lack of direct evidence of its true purpose and apparent functionality as a current source continue to fuel the mystery. Another intriguing artifact directly linked to Egypt is the Dendera lamp, or the Dendera light bulb. Reliefs in the crypt of the Temple of Hathor in Dendera depict strange objects resembling giant flasks, inside which a snake, a symbol of the deity, is writhing, and all this is supported by a pillar. A cable extends from the neck of the bulb, which is connected to some kind of mechanism that resembles an insulator or generator. These images strongly resemble Crookes tubes, incandescent lamps, or other electrical devices. Proponents of ancient technology hypotheses claim that this is proof of the use of electricity in ancient Egypt, possibly to light temples without torches that would leave soot on the ceilings and walls. And some deep tombs do not have traces of soot. Egyptologists, however, interpret these reliefs as purely symbolic sayings representing a mythological plot. A snake emerging from a lotus flower symbolizes the creation of the world or the birth of a deity, and the cable and insulator are just stylized parts of a mythological tree or support. Despite the scientific explanation, the visual similarity to modern technology continues to be striking and causes a lively debate. In addition to these two well-known examples, there are other, less well-known, but no less mysterious artifacts. Perfectly shaped stone vases made of hard rocks, carved with the thinnest walls and narrow necks, where no hand tools would fit. Processed metal objects that would seem to require tools that appeared much later, and even some depictions of animals, such as dinosaurs, in temples that challenge our understanding of contacts between civilizations or the nature of the prehistoric world. The secret of these artifacts is that they challenge our linear view of technological progress, making us wonder if the ancient Egyptians had some lost knowledge or techniques that we still can't fully understand or recreate. The Eye of Horus mystery, medical knowledge, and hidden mathematics. Among the many symbols of ancient Egypt, the Eye of Horus, or Ujat, is one of the most recognizable and revered. It was originally a protective amulet associated with the god Horus, who lost his eye in a battle with his uncle Seth, and was later healed by the god of wisdom, Thoth. This symbol was widely used in art, jewelry, and funeral rites as a powerful talisman that brings protection, health, and well-being. However, in addition to its obvious mythological and protective function, modern research has revealed something much deeper and more mysterious about the Eye of Horus symbol. Hidden mathematical and medical knowledge that seems to go beyond what we usually attribute to ancient civilizations. The main mystery of the Eye of Horus lies in its fragmentary structure and unexpected connection with the ancient Egyptian system of fractions. Each of the 6 parts of the Eye of Horus symbol corresponds to a certain fraction: 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, 1/32, and 1/64. If you add up all these fractions, they add up to 63/64, not an integer. This missing 1/64 part is often explained mythologically. The missing hour symbolizes the loss of the Eye of Horus and its incomplete healing, or the need for divine intervention. However, why exactly these fractions, and why are they so precisely distributed among the elements of the symbol? Some researchers suggest that this crushing system was used by the Egyptians in medical prescriptions and in the preparation of medicines, as well as in measuring grain or other products. This would mean that the symbol of the Eye of Horus was not just an amulet, but also a kind of mnemonic device, or even a textbook for mastering complex mathematical concepts, demonstrating an unexpectedly high level of abstract thinking and practical application of mathematics. In addition, it is suggested that different parts of Horus eye may have symbolized different sensory organs or parts of the human brain, indicating a deep anatomical knowledge of the Egyptians. For example, the part responsible for 1-2 is associated with smell at the top of the nostrils, 1-4 with vision, pupil, 1-8 with hearing, ear, 1-16 with taste, mouth, 1-32 with touch, hand extended at the bottom, and 1-64 with thought or knowledge. If this is the case, then the Horus eye symbol becomes not only a mathematical formula, but also a complex anatomical map, or a diagram showing how different parts of the human brain or sense organs are interconnected. How could the ancient Egyptians, without modern research methods, have had such a deep knowledge of brain functions and sensory systems? Did they have any dissection techniques, observations, or philosophical concepts that led them to this understanding? The riddle of the Eye of Horus thus goes beyond mere symbolism. It hints at the existence of complex medical and mathematical knowledge among the ancient Egyptians, which may have been encoded in their religious symbols and which we are just beginning to decipher. This suggests that their science and religion were inextricably linked, and that their ability to think abstractly and apply mathematics in practice was much more advanced than is commonly believed. This mystery continues to inspire new research to understand the true depth of ancient Egyptian genius hidden behind seemingly simple images. The secret of the water maze and the vanished pyramids of the Fayum Oasis. In addition to the famous pyramids of Giza, ancient Egypt was home to many other lesser-known but equally mysterious monumental structures, many of which eventually disappeared or were severely destroyed. Among them, a special place is occupied by the Fayum Oasis and related mystical structures, which were written about by ancient Greek historians, but whose traces are still the subject of active research and scientific discussions. One of the greatest such mysteries is the legendary water maze described by Herodotus and Strabo, and the question of its true location and scale, as well as the fate of the vanished pyramids of this region. The water maze is described by Herodotus as a structure that surpasses even the pyramids in its grandeur and complexity. It consisted of 12 covered courtyards connected by passageways, with hundreds of rooms both above ground and below ground. The walls of the labyrinth were covered with reliefs and inscriptions, and its underground parts, according to Herodotus, contained the tombs of pharaohs and sacred crocodiles. Later authors, such as Strabo, also mention this structure, indicating that it was located near the city of Shedet, Crocodilopol, present-day Medinat al-Fayum, and Lake Moris, present-day Lake Karun. However, despite these detailed descriptions, archaeologists still haven't found any remains that fully fit this grandiose description. Some fragments have been found, such as the remains of a huge sandstone and granite foundation that is associated with the temple complex of Amenemhat III in Havara, but they do not correspond to the scale and complexity described. Perhaps the ancient authors enlarged it, or most of the maze was completely destroyed, and its stones were used for other buildings. Another hypothesis is that the labyrinth was not so much a building as a vast system of canals and reservoirs that controlled the waters of the Nile and its surrounding rivers. Lake Moeris, which was an engineering marvel, but not a monumental structure in the usual sense. In addition to the labyrinth, the Fayum Oasis was the site of several Middle Kingdom pyramids, which today are in significantly worse condition than their Gizan counterparts. Among them are the pyramids in Kawar, Lahun, and Meidum. These pyramids, built of mud bricks and only faced with stone, were much less durable and preserved worse than the stone pyramids of the ancient kingdom. Many of them today look like shapeless hills. The mystery of these vanished or destroyed pyramids lies not only in their material, but also in why the pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom moved away from the granite stone traditions of the ancient kingdom and why their monuments were less durable. This may have been due to a change in religious beliefs, economic considerations, or a desire to speed up construction. For example, the pyramid in Meidum was originally a step pyramid and then was converted to a true pyramid, but collapsed during construction or shortly after, which indicates problems in engineering calculations or a sudden change in the project. Thus, the Fayum Oasis and its mystical structures present a double mystery. The existence of the water maze, which seems to have been lost to history, and the fate of the less solid pyramids, which are barely discernible today. These mysteries force us to rethink our understanding of ancient Egyptian architecture and engineering, as well as to find answers to questions about how construction priorities and technologies have changed over different eras, and why some of the greatest creations of antiquity have been so irretrievably lost. The secret of the Serapeum, giant sarcophagi and unknown methods of their creation. Beneath the shifting sands of Saqqara, the ancient necropolis of Memphis, lies one of the most mysterious and striking structures of ancient Egypt, the Serapeum. This vast underground vault, a complex of tunnels and galleries cut into solid rock, was discovered by Auguste Mariette in the mid-19th century. It served as a burial place for the sacred Apis bulls, the incarnations of the god Ptah. However, it is not so much the fact of burying the animals that surprises researchers, as the colossal scale and amazing accuracy of manufacturing the sarcophagi in which these bulls were laid to rest. This mystery challenges the modern understanding of ancient technologies and raises questions about the purpose of creating such monumental and seemingly redundant structures. Inside the Serapeum are 24 huge sarcophagi carved from monolithic blocks of granite, diorite, and basalt, some of the hardest rocks on Earth. Each of these sarcophagi weighs between 70 and 100 tons, and their lids add about 30 tons more. The sarcophagi themselves have strikingly smooth, perfectly flat internal and external surfaces, and their corners are chiseled with such incredible precision that it seems as if they are the work of modern equipment and not tools of the Bronze Age. Measurements show that deviations from the ideal plane are literally fractions of a millimeter. How could the ancient Egyptians, without iron tools, much less electricity or high-precision machine tools, carve, polish, and fit such giant blocks with such precision? Traditional Egyptology involves the use of percussion instruments made of dolerite, a very hard rock, as well as abrasive materials such as quartz sand. However, this process would be incredibly time-consuming and slow, and achieving such high accuracy by manual methods, even with the most abrasive powders, raises serious doubts among engineers and stone carvers. Traces of processing, which can be seen on some sarcophagi, do not always correspond to the known ancient methods. Some grooves and scratches, for example, appear too smooth and uniform to be the result of hand tools. In addition to the manufacturing methods, there is also the mystery of transporting and installing these colossal sarcophagi in underground tunnels. The Serapeum is located at a considerable distance from the main granite quarries, such as Aswan. How were these 100-ton blocks moved for hundreds of kilometers, then lowered into narrow, dark underground galleries and precisely installed in their places? It is assumed that wooden sleds, levers, and ramp systems were used, but in the conditions of underground mazes, this would be a task of incredible complexity. In addition, the interior of the Serapeum is sometimes so narrow that it leaves almost no room for maneuvering with such giant objects. The absence of any soot on the walls from torches also adds mystery to the question of lighting these underground works. Finally, the very meaning of creation, such excessively large and complex sarcophagi for bulls, raises questions. Why were burial chambers created for sacred animals that surpass many royal tombs in scale and quality of manufacture? This may indicate an incredible degree of veneration for these animals, but it may also hint at a deeper, perhaps cosmic or energetic meaning of these structures that we have yet to understand. The Serapeum, with its giant, strikingly accurate sarcophagi, continues to be one of the most intriguing places in Egypt, demonstrating the engineering and technological abilities of the ancient Egyptians that seem to go beyond the usual understanding, leaving a trail of unresolved questions in their wake. The mystery of the Antikythera mechanism and its Egyptian parallels. Although the Antikythera mechanism was discovered in Greek waters in 1901 at the site of an ancient shipwreck and dates back to approximately 100-200 BCE, its intricate design and remarkable level of engineering, as well as evidence of possible links to Egyptian astronomical knowledge, make it extremely important for understanding the general context of forgotten, ancient technologies, in particular including in Egypt. Often referred to as the world's first analog computer, this artifact was designed to calculate the astronomical positions of celestial bodies with incredible accuracy. Its existence casts doubt on the linear development of technology and makes one wonder if the ancient Egyptians, with their deep astronomical knowledge, did not have similar, but not yet found mechanisms. The Antikythera mechanism is a complex device consisting of dozens of bronze gears, dials, and hands enclosed in a wooden case. By rotating the handle, it could calculate the positions of the sun, moon, and planets, predict solar and lunar eclipses, and show the dates of various sports games. The level of its complexity was so high that similar mechanisms in accuracy appeared only in the late Middle Ages, after more than 1,500 years. How could such a technology have existed in the ancient world? Who were its inventors and manufacturers? And if the Greeks had such knowledge, could it have been inherited or developed from earlier? Egyptian sources, given the close connection between Greek and Egyptian science in the Hellenistic period. By itself, this discovery raises the question of the existence of lost high technologies in ancient times. If one such complex mechanism was created, there may have been more, but they were lost or destroyed. Given that the ancient Egyptians were masters of astronomy and calendar calculations, and also had extensive temples that may have been used as observatories, for example, the Temple of Hathor in Dendera, with its famous zodiac, the question arises, did they not have similar, perhaps less complex, but still mechanical devices for astronomical observations or calculations? The Egyptians accurately tracked the movement of the stars to determine the exact time for religious rituals and agricultural work. Their knowledge of the movement of celestial bodies was extremely profound. For example, their ability to orient the pyramids with such startling accuracy to the cardinal directions required advanced astronomical observations and possibly tools that we don't yet understand. The idea that the Egyptians may have possessed mechanical astronomical instruments is reinforced when we consider their skill in creating sophisticated clocks, such as water clocks, clepsydras, that could show time even at night. Although these are not Antikythera-type mechanisms, they demonstrate the ability to accurately engineer and measure time. Perhaps this knowledge developed in parallel or was inherited by the Greeks, who in turn, they developed them to the level of the Antikythera mechanism. The mystery of this mechanism is thus a mirror that reflects a broader problem. We may be underestimating the level of technological and scientific development of ancient civilizations, and in the bowels of Egypt, as well as other ancient lands, there may be hidden artifacts that can turn our ideas about the past. This raises questions not only about ancient technologies, but also about how knowledge can be lost and forgotten for thousands of years before being rediscovered. The secret of the gold plates of the Untersee and the secrets of metallurgy of the ancient kingdom. Among the numerous archaeological finds recovered from the sands of ancient Egypt, some artifacts continue to baffle scientists, raising questions about the true level of metallurgical knowledge and technological capabilities of the pharaonic civilization. Of particular interest are the so-called Untersee gold plates found in the tomb of the first dynasty Pharaoh Jer, circa 3000 BC, in Abydos. These fine sheets of gold attached to the mummified hands of the pharaoh impress with their incredible ductility and purity, which seems to exceed the possibilities of metalworking of that period. Their existence hints at the lost secrets of ancient Egyptian metallurgy and raises the question of how such a complex technology could have been mastered at such an early stage of civilization. Gold plates of the Untersee are not just jewelry. They are extremely thin sheets of gold that were formed so precisely and fit snugly against the mummified fingers and hands that they gave the impression of gold gloves or skin covering. What is striking is that their creation required not only the high purity of gold, but also the ability to roll out the metal to an incredible fineness while maintaining its strength and ductility. In the early dynastic period, when Edi plates were created, the main methods of metalworking included forging and melting in primitive crucibles. However, to obtain such fineness and uniformity as these plates would require techniques close to modern rolling or extremely precise and repeated cold forging, which is itself a complex process that requires temperature control and great skill. The lack of visible marks of seams or adhesions also raises questions, suggesting either the use of an incredibly large sheet of gold or some unknown joining method that was so perfect that it left no trace. The main mystery is the level of control over the purity and temperature of gold. Rolling gold to this fineness without breaking or deforming requires high-quality gold, as well as precise control of its temperature during processing to avoid brittleness or excessive softness. How could the ancient Egyptians achieve such a high purity of gold, using only primitive furnaces and without modern methods of purification? And how could they control the heating temperature so precisely that the metal remained sufficiently ductile, but did not melt or deform under pressure? Let's lie. The best metallurgical processes to achieve this fineness include high-precision equipment, vacuum furnaces, and strict control of alloy composition. The discovery of these plates in such an early tomb suggests that the ancient Egyptians had advanced knowledge in the field of materials science, which may have been lost or used only for high-status items. This mystery also resonates with the general question of the skill of ancient Egyptian goldsmiths and artisans. Subsequently, during the New Kingdom period, we see incredible examples of gold work, such as the burial mask of Tutankhamun, made of pure gold and decorated with inlays. However, the golden plates of the Untersee show not just mastery, but mastery of subtle physical and chemical processes that seem anachronistic for their time. Perhaps the Egyptians possessed some sort of alchemical or empirical wisdom based on thousands of years of experiments and passed down from master to master in the strictest secrecy. If so, much of this knowledge may have been lost along with the disappearance of artisan family lines or the destruction of workshops. The mystery of these gold plates is thus evidence not only of aesthetic excellence, but also of potentially understood technological breakthroughs that challenge our understanding of the history of metallurgy and suggest that the ancient Egyptians possess secrets that we still cannot fully reproduce or explain using only the methods we know. The mystery of the Valley of the Kings, unmarked tombs and unsolved treasures. The Valley of the Kings, located on the west bank of the Nile opposite Luxor, is one of the most sacred and mysterious places in ancient Egypt. For almost 500 years during the New Kingdom period, from about 1539 to 1075 BC, this secluded valley served as a necropolis for pharaohs, powerful nobles, and their families. Dozens of tombs have been dug here, many of which are complex underground complexes with numerous chambers, corridors, and traps, decorated with magnificent paintings and reliefs telling about the afterlife and the journey of the pharaoh. However, despite centuries of intensive excavations, the Valley of the Kings continues to hold its own secrets, the main one of which is the mystery of unmarked, not yet found tombs and the question of what unsolved treasures and stories they may hide. To date, more than 60 tombs have been officially discovered in the Valley of the Kings, the most famous of which is the tomb of Tutankhamun, KV 62, which left the world its incredible treasures. However, Egyptologists and archaeologists believe that the valley hides not one, but probably several undiscovered tombs. Why do they remain undiscovered, given modern technologies and methods of geophysical research, such as radar, earth scanning, and satellite images? Perhaps these tombs are located in places that were considered uninhabitable for burial, or they were so carefully camouflaged that their entrance openings merged with the surrounding landscape over the millennia, completely hidden under tons of stone and rubble that collapsed as a result of earthquakes or natural erosion. Some of them may have been built in completely unusual places, different from the traditional location. Of particular interest is the hypothesis of hidden chambers inside already known tombs. For example, the theory of a possible secret room behind the wall in Tutankhamun's tomb, where the tomb of Nefertiti or another unknown queen was supposed to be located, was widely discussed. Although recent radar studies seem to have disproved this particular theory, the very possibility of such hidden rooms being walled up and camouflaged with incredible skill remains intriguing. This may mean that the Egyptians had special methods of concealment that are still not fully understood. How could they be so adept at hiding the entrances that even after thousands of years and under the noses of archaeologists, they remain invisible? Another great mystery is connected with the names of unmarked pharaohs whose reigns are recorded in the royal lists, but whose tombs have not yet been found in the Valley of the Kings. Among them are such important figures as Rameses IV. Where did these rulers go? Were their tombs looted so thoroughly that no trace of them remained? Or were they buried in other necropolises that had not yet been discovered? Or in secret places that were known only to a small circle of initiates? Perhaps some of them were buried in the tombs of their predecessors, but without direct evidence, this remains only a guess. The mystery of the unmarked tombs of the Valley of the Kings is not just a matter of treasure hunting. This is a search for missing links in history that could reveal new details about the life, rule, and beliefs of the pharaohs, as well as about the hidden rituals and practices that the Egyptians kept in the strictest secrecy. Each new square meter, each layer of sand explored in this sacred valley, carries the potential for discovery that can turn our understanding of the great civilization, which so carefully tried to protect its secrets from prying eyes. The mystery of the unfinished obelisk in Aswan, evidence of incredible ambition and unfathomable difficulties. In the granite quarries of Aswan, in southern Egypt, lies a colossal unfinished obelisk that is one of the most eloquent yet mysterious evidences of engineering ambition and the incredible difficulties faced by the ancient Egyptians. This monument, probably intended for Queen Hatshepsut or Thutmose III, was intended to be the largest obelisk ever built. It would have been estimated to be about 42 meters long and weigh more than 200 tons, about a third the size of any existing obelisk. However, it was never separated from the rock. Its presence in the quarry, incomplete and fractured, raises many questions about mining methods, the reasons for abandoning such a grandiose project, and the true limits of ancient Egyptian technology. The main mystery of the unfinished obelisk is how the Egyptians planned to extract it from the rock, and in particular, how they were going to transport and install such a colossal monolith. Unlike the smaller blocks, the obelisk was more than 40 meters long and could not be simply rolled back. Its 200-ton weight makes it one of the heaviest objects ever attempted to be moved in the ancient world. The traditional hypothesis suggests that the Egyptians used rows of workers who manually knocked out the rocks around the obelisk with dolerite balls, and then used water to widen the cracks and finally separate the monolith. Tool marks on the obelisk do indeed indicate a time-consuming impact process. However, even with this method, the question of how they were going to lift and move the obelisk over huge distances to the installation site and then install it vertically remains unanswered. Huge embankments, ramps, and complex lever systems are supposed to be used, but for such a weight and size, these methods seem almost incredible without the support of modern engineering calculations. The second mystery relates to the reason why the obelisk was left unfinished. On its surface, you can see a huge crack running along its entire length. The official explanation states that the crack appeared during logging, which made further work impossible, and the project was abandoned. However, this raises the question of the qualifications of ancient masters. Could they have made such a fatal mistake at the earliest stage, or at a late stage of work, when so much work and resources were already invested? Or could the crack have appeared as a result of seismic activity or some other natural phenomenon after the partial separation of the obelisk? Some researchers also suggest that the project may have been abandoned due to a change in the political situation, the death of the pharaoh who ordered it, or economic difficulties that made the completion of such an ambitious enterprise impossible. The obelisk demonstrates that the ancient Egyptians were willing to undertake projects of incredible scale, but it also shows that even their skill had its limits, or that they had to face unsolvable problems. This monumental failure in the Aswan quarry, the so-called field for research, opens a unique window into the world of ancient Egyptian engineering practices, showing not only their grandiose designs, but also their real physical limitations. The mystery of the unfinished obelisk not only highlights the amazing achievements of the ancient builders, but also makes us think about the scale of their failures, the methods of trial and error, as well as the unimaginable price they paid for their ambitions, leaving behind colossal stones that still haunt us and raise questions about the boundaries. A new one. The mystery of Egypt's prehistoric geoglyphs, forgotten images, and unknown cultures. In addition to the well-studied dynastic monuments, Egypt's vast desert landscapes conceal much older and less understood mysteries. Prehistoric geoglyphs and petroglyphs scattered across the western desert and other poorly understood regions. These massive images, etched or laid out on the ground, as well as rock carvings, were created long before the advent of dynastic Egypt, during periods when the Sahara was a green savanna and the region's climate was significantly wetter. Their existence calls into question the chronology of the development of art and engineering skills on the African continent, and also hints at the presence of unknown or poorly understood pre-dynastic cultures, whose beliefs and motives still remain undeciphered. One of the most intriguing finds is Nabta Playa, an ancient astronomical structure in the western desert consisting of a circle of stones and vertically standing megaliths dating from around 4500 BC, making it one of the oldest known astronomical complexes in the world, predating Stonehenge. This place served not only as an observatory for tracking the summer solstice, but also possibly as a ritual center associated with the cult of rain or water. The structure itself, built by nomadic tribes, challenges the notion that sophisticated astronomical knowledge and the ability to construct megalithic structures only emerged with the advent of sedentary civilizations. How could these nomadic hunter-gatherers have had such a deep knowledge of the movement of celestial bodies and the ability to design so precisely? And why didn't this tradition develop in the later, more developed cultures of the region? In addition to Nabta Playa, in remote regions of Egypt, especially in the Sahara Desert, there are thousands of petroglyphs and geoglyphs depicting animals that have not lived in these arid lands for a long time: elephants, giraffes, antelopes, crocodiles, as well as strange anthropomorphic figures and abstract symbols. Some of these images are so huge that they can only be seen from the internet. This suggests that they may have been created as landmarks for travelers to communicate with deities in the heavens or as part of unknown rituals. Who were these people who created such large-scale images on Earth? And what was their purpose? Many of these drawings are executed with amazing skill and detail, despite their antiquity, which indicates a developed artistic sense and perhaps a deep symbolism that is unknown to us. The biggest mystery of these prehistoric images is their connection to the subsequent dynastic civilization. Is there any continuity between these ancient nomadic cultures, which created astronomical complexes and rock paintings, and the early dynasties of Egypt, which appeared thousands of years later? Or were they completely separate cultures whose knowledge and beliefs were lost as a result of climate change, migration, and the disappearance of the water balance in the Sahara? Climate change, which turned fertile savannas into barren deserts, probably forced these ancient peoples to migrate to the Nile, where they may have become the basis for the future Egyptian civilization. However, if this is the case, then why wasn't much of their knowledge, especially in the field of megalithic architecture and large-scale art, inherited or developed in dynastic Egypt in the same way? These ancient geoglyphs and petroglyphs are silent testimonies of forgotten peoples and their deep connections to the environment and the cosmos that still defy full explanation, reminding us of a much older and more complex history of Egypt than we normally study. The mystery of the pyramid construction mechanism, theories of ramps and levitation, the grandeur and engineering precision of the Great Pyramids of Giza, and in particular the Pyramids of Cheops, continue to be one of the most fundamental and controversial mysteries of ancient Egypt. How could a civilization that did not have iron, wheels in its usual sense for transporting heavy loads, and in fact relied on primitive tools made of copper and stone, was able to build structures of such a scale and with such mathematical and astronomical accuracy? The question of pyramid construction methods has given rise to many theories, from the most academic to the most esoteric, none of which has yet received definitive and comprehensive confirmation, which makes this mystery eternal. Official Egyptology adheres to the theory of using ramps. There are several variants of this hypothesis, each of which faces its own difficulties. A straight ramp that goes straight up to the top of the pyramid seems logical at first glance, but its scale makes it almost impossible. To reach the top of the Pyramid of Cheops, about 146 meters, such a ramp, in order to have a reasonable slope, for example, 7 to 8 degrees for moving heavy blocks, would have to be several kilometers long, its volume would exceed the volume of the pyramid itself, and its construction and subsequent dismantling would require even more resources than the pyramid itself, which makes this version extremely unlikely. In addition, such a ramp would be extremely unstable when moving multi-ton blocks, especially under the scorching sun, which could dry out and weaken its structure. The second option is a spiral ramp that wraps around the pyramid as it grows. This is more realistic in terms of the overall length and volume of the material, but raises other serious questions. How could the workers lift and turn huge blocks on narrow and sharp turns? Imagine how it would be difficult to deploy a stone block weighing several tons at each corner of the ramp, given the limited space and the risk of collapse. Also, how could the accuracy of the angles and overall geometric shape of the pyramid be controlled if it was hidden under an ever-growing spiral ramp? The absence of any archaeological traces of such massive ramps, which should have remained colossal structures even after being dismantled, is also a strong argument against this theory. The third option, proposed by French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin, is an internal ramp that runs inside the pyramid itself. This theory suggests that most of the blocks were raised by external ramps to a certain height, and then the final layers in the top were built using an internal spiral tunnel. While this theory explains the lack of external ramps and facilitates transportation of some blocks, it also has its own difficulties, including the lack of direct archaeological evidence for the existence of such a tunnel, other than small anomalies found during scanning of the pyramid, which may be something else. In addition, moving huge granite blocks for chambers and sarcophagi along such an internal ramp is still a gigantic task, requiring complex logistics and unprecedented skill in tight conditions. In addition to the lifting methods, there is a mystery of the accuracy of stone processing and block fitting. The millions of limestone blocks that make up the pyramid, especially the exterior cladding, which today is almost completely lost due to the use of stone for other buildings, were fitted with such incredible accuracy that the gaps between them were even fractions of a millimeter. How was this achieved with copper and stone tools that were not known to have sufficient hardness to work effectively with a material as hard as limestone, let alone granite? The use of dolerite balls for impact treatment and abrasive sand for polishing is a very labor-intensive process, which could hardly provide such uniformity and flatness over huge areas and hundreds of thousands of blocks. Some researchers suggest that the Egyptians may have used some form of vibration processing or even ultrasonic technology to soften the stone or make it easier to cut. Of course, this sounds like science fiction, but the lack of convincing explanations using traditional methods encourages the search for non-standard solutions. Accuracy of orientation of the Pyramid of Cheops to the cardinal directions, deviation of only 3 arc minutes. It is also a testament to incredible astronomical and geodetic knowledge that cannot be fully explained by stargazing alone or using a primitive plumb line. How could they determine the true north with such amazing accuracy without a compass or modern navigation instruments? Less orthodox theories offer much more radical explanations. Some proponents of the alien intervention theory, it is claimed that the pyramids were built using extraterrestrial technologies, such as anti-gravity or energy beams, which allowed the stones to be moved and processed. Of course, there is no archaeological evidence for this, but the idea itself arose because of the apparent unsolvability of the puzzle by traditional methods. Other hypotheses include the use of unknown chemical solutions to soften the stone, which then hardened, allowing blocks to be cast on site rather than being cut down in quarries. Or even building blocks of geopolymer concrete on site, rather than cutting them down in quarries. The latest theory, proposed by the French chemist Joseph Davidowitz, states that the stones of the pyramids are not natural limestone, but artificial concrete created from limestone chips with the addition of binders. Although this theory has received some support and explains some anomalies in the structure of the stones, it contradicts most geological studies, which confirm that the vast majority of pyramid blocks are natural stone, extracted from the surrounding quarries. Overall, the mystery of pyramid construction remains a cornerstone of ancient Egyptian Egyptology, a constant reminder that even the most brilliant scientific minds can't always fully unravel the engineering secrets of antiquity, leaving room for endless research and intriguing speculation about the limits of human capabilities and lost knowledge. The phenomenon of traveling stones and the movement of colossal statues. The ancient Egyptians were unsurpassed masters of monumental art, creating colossal statues, obelisks, giant columns, and other architectural elements carved from solid blocks of stone. These giant monoliths, some of which weighed hundreds or even thousands of tons, somehow inexplicably moved over vast distances, from remote quarries to installation sites, often through complex, sometimes rugged terrain, and even water barriers such as the Nile. The phenomenon of traveling stones is one of the most impressive and least understood technological mysteries that challenges our understanding of the logistics, engineering capabilities, and workforce of the ancient world. How could the Egyptians, without modern heavy equipment, powerful cranes, or diesel engines, move such colossal loads with amazing accuracy and speed? The most striking example of this mystery is the Colossus of Memnon, two massive statues of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, each weighing about 700 tons, carved from solid quartzite. These colossi were originally located in the Gebel el-Silsila quarry, located more than 600 kilometers north of Thebes, where they were installed. Moving these statues overland for such vast distances to the river, then across the Nile to the West Bank, and then overland to the temple complex seems like a titanic, almost impossible task. How could they move such loads through quicksand or rough terrain? Similar problems arise with granite obelisks that were quarried in Aswan and transported hundreds of kilometers up the Nile to cities like Luxor, Karnak, or even Heliopolis, modern-day Cairo. Some of these obelisks weighed up to 300 to 400 tons, and the unfinished obelisk at Aswanya, which we discussed earlier, would have weighed over 200 tons if completed. The very fact that the Egyptians even tried to move an object of such weight speaks to an amazing confidence in their methods. The traditional explanation involves the use of a wooden sled or sled that was dragged along specially prepared roads or embankments. To reduce friction, these roads could be lubricated with water, clay, or even oil. It is believed that hundreds or even thousands of workers, organized in teams, pulled these sleds using strong ropes. Some ancient reliefs, such as those from the tomb of Jehudiotep in Deir el-Bersha, depict scenes of a giant statue being moved on a sled, with a man standing in front of the sled pouring water or oil, and ropes being pulled by dozens, if not hundreds of people. However, these images tend to relate to smaller statues and contain symbolic images that do not give a complete understanding of the entire mechanism. In addition, even with the use of a sled, moving objects weighing hundreds of tons over rough terrain or downhill, and then loading and unloading them on specially built barges for transportation on the Nile for this purpose, seems to be a task that requires a much more complex approach than just brute physical force. Calculations show that moving a 700-ton colossus would require the work of thousands of workers simultaneously, which in itself creates coordination and supply problems. Especially mysterious is the process of loading and unloading these colossi from barges. Moving the 700-ton statue from shore to barge, and then from it on the other side, would require special sloping ramps, incredibly strong wooden structures, and perfectly timed support points to avoid damaging the monolith and sinking the barge. Given the unpredictability of the Nile's water level, especially during floods and the risk of capsizing, this stage would be incredibly dangerous and challenging. The lack of detailed written descriptions of these complex engineering operations in ancient texts also adds to the mystery. Why did the Egyptians describe religious rituals, everyday scenes, and military campaigns in such detail, but remain silent about their most impressive technological achievements in heavy construction? Perhaps this knowledge was sacred, passed down orally from generation to generation of masters, or was considered something so ordinary for that time that it did not require a detailed description. Some researchers suggest harnessing the buoyancy force by flooding channels or creating temporary reservoirs to make it easier to move objects to barges, or even using a complex system of levers, blocks, and counterweights that could multiply the lifting force, allowing a limited number of workers to move huge weights. There are also marginal hypotheses that include the use of sound vibrations to levitate rocks, or even more exotic ideas, but they have no scientific basis. However, the fact remains that the Egyptians somehow regularly moved objects that defy modern methods without the use of giant cranes and diesel engines. The riddle of traveling stones is not just an engineering puzzle. It is a question of how deep the Egyptians' understanding of physics, mechanics, and the organization of labor was, and whether they had any ingenious modern-day methods. Lost methods that allowed them to perform seemingly impossible feats, leaving us baffled by their ability to overcome such colossal logistical barriers. This mystery forces us to rethink the level of development of ancient civilizations and recognize that many of their secrets may have remained forever buried under the sands of time. Mysterious catacombs of Qom al-Shukafa, a mix of cultures and mysterious images. In Alexandria, under the modern streets of the once great Hellenistic city, hides one of the most unusual and intriguing archaeological finds of ancient Egypt, the catacombs of Qom al-Shukafa. These vast, multi-level underground tombs, dating back to the 2nd century AD, when Egypt was under Roman rule, are an amazing mix of ancient Egyptian, Greco-Roman, and possibly even local cultural and religious traditions. It is this confluence of different beliefs and artistic styles that gives rise to many mysteries that are still controversial among historians and archaeologists, calling into question our understanding of cultural exchange in late antique Egypt. The main mystery of the catacombs is their unique syncretism. Although the main style of the tombs remains Roman, with traditional niches for urns and sarcophagi, many decorative elements and images are deeply rooted in Egyptian mythology, but presented in a Greco-Roman manner. For example, we see Osiris, the god of the afterlife, depicted as a Roman emperor, or Anubis, the god of embalming, dressed in a Roman toga and standing next to the god Hermes. Images of ancient Egyptian deities such as Sobek, crocodile god, and Horus, falcon god, are also present, but they are stylized in such a way that they look like characters from Greco-Roman myths. This confusion not only indicates the coexistence of cultures, but also their deep interpenetration at the level of beliefs and rituals. The question is, how widespread was such a deep fusion of religions among the Egyptian population at that time? Was it the whim of rich clients who wanted to express their cosmopolitanism? Or was it evidence of a massive religious syncretism that is still not fully understood? And what role did local cults play in this, which could adapt and assimilate elements of both Egyptian and Greco-Roman religion? Of particular interest is the main burial chamber, which has a round shape and is supported by columns, and in the center there is a massive pillared hall. Around this hall are 3 large niches with sarcophagi carved directly from the rock. Murals on the walls show scenes that seem to be a mixture of Roman funerary rites and Egyptian concepts of the afterlife. For example, the mummification scene, which is traditionally Egyptian, is presented using Roman clothing and architecture. On one wall is a scene often referred to as Anubis in Roman clothing, where the god of embalming stands over a mummy, but his figure resembles a Greek god. This is not just a stylization, it is a reinterpretation of the deities themselves. How was such a merger perceived by ordinary Egyptians or Greeks who lived in Alexandria? Was it a manifestation of it an attempt to gain a deep philosophical understanding of the commonality of divine principles? Or is it an attempt to attract followers from different cultural backgrounds? Another mystery of the catacombs is their scale and complexity. The 3-level structure, carved out of the rock, with a spiral staircase leading down in many chambers, testifies to the enormous effort and cost of construction. Who were the customers of these catacombs? Was it one rich family, or was it a common burial ground for the elite of Alexandria? And how could they so precisely carve such huge volumes of stone underground, while still providing ventilation and lighting? The absence of soot from torches in some deep parts of the catacombs also leads to speculation about the possible use of unknown light sources, although this is only speculation. The secret of the Qom al-Shukafa catacombs lies not only in their archaeological value, but also in their role as a mirror of the cultural and religious dialogue between East and West in the ancient era. They are silent evidence of a complex and multifaceted process of assimilation and adaptation that is still not fully understood. and which continues to raise questions about the nature of identity in the ancient world. The mystery of cursed pharaohs and vanished names, stigmatization and oblivion. The history of ancient Egypt, despite its amazing completeness, is replete with mysterious gaps and deliberately erased pages, especially when it comes to the so-called cursed pharaohs rulers whose names were deleted from the royal lists and monuments were destroyed or appropriated by their successors. This practice, known as damnatio memoriae, was a powerful tool of political and religious struggle aimed at completely erasing the personality and rule of the objectionable ruler from historical memory, and more importantly, from the afterlife. However, despite the seemingly obvious goal, many aspects of this practice remain a mystery, including its true effectiveness, as well as the full list of those who have been so neglected. The most striking and famous example of a cursed pharaoh is, of course, Akhenaten, the pharaoh of the Sphinx dynasty, who tried to radically change the religious foundations of Egypt by introducing the cult of the one god Aten. After his death, the traditionalists came to power, and Akhenaten's name was systematically deleted from all royal lists. His monuments were destroyed, and the capital Akhenaten, Amarna, was abandoned. The same thing happened to his immediate successors, including his son Tutankhamun, originally Tutankhaten, and although their names were later restored. The mystery lies in how deeply this practice penetrated everyday life. If the pharaoh's name was erased, how did it affect his servants, priests, or ordinary people who came into contact with him? Was it a taboo to mention his name, or just an official exclusion from the historical record? And how successful was this attempt to erase the memory if we, after thousands of years, were able to restore the name of Akhenaten and his family? A story. This shows that complete oblivion was almost impossible, and even under the rubble of destroyed monuments, there were traces of the existence of a forbidden ruler. In addition to the Amarna period, the practice of damnatio memoriae was also applied in other cases. For example, Queen Hatshepsut, one of the few female pharaohs, also fell victim to a similar curse. After her death, her stepson and successor, Thutmose III, ordered her name and images to be erased from every monument within reach, attempting to portray her mother as a usurpator and remove her from the official royal line. This was done perhaps in order to strengthen their legitimacy or because of personal hostility. However, as in the case of Akhenaten, the efforts were not entirely successful, and many traces of Hatshepsut have been preserved here, allowing modern researchers to reconstruct its history. Why was the erasure more thorough in some cases and less so in others? Was it related to resources, time, or the degree of hatred for the ruler? Even more mysterious are the unseen or unmentioned pharaohs whose reigns are suspected of being deliberately erased. There are periods in Egyptian history where the royal lists are interrupted or contain dashes, which may indicate not only a lack of information, but also an attempt to hide the rule of someone who was considered illegitimate or undesirable for subsequent dynasties. For example, there are hypotheses about forgotten rulers of the first and second transition periods whose names may have been deleted due to their low status, short rule, or regional nature of their power. The secret of the cursed pharaohs lies not only in revealing their names and deeds, but also in understanding the deep psychological and religious significance that the ancient Egyptians attached to name and memory. For them, erasing the name meant destroying the existence of a person in eternity, depriving him of the possibility of living in the afterlife. Studying these erased pages helps us understand not only the political intrigues and religious conflicts, but also the very nature of power and memory in one of the greatest civilizations of antiquity, demonstrating that even the most powerful pharaohs could not always control their posthumous fate and historical legacy. The secret of the Kui tomb, the oldest pyramid, the forgotten pharaoh and architectural anomalies. In the heart of the Dashur necropolis, located south of Giza, among the already famous pyramids and mastabas, archaeological research in recent decades has revealed an incredible and still not fully understood mystery, the tomb of Pharaoh Kui. This seemingly modest step pyramid, discovered only in the early 2000s, suddenly turned out to be one of the oldest, if not the oldest, pyramid structures in Egypt, dating from the end of the 3rd or beginning of the 4th dynasty, approximately 2600 to 2500 BC. making it a precursor even to the famous Djoser Pyramid of Saqqara, which was traditionally considered the first. Its age, unusual architecture, and paucity of information about Pharaoh Kui himself create many unsolvable questions that overturn the established ideas about the origin of monumental construction and dynastic chronology. The main mystery of the Kui tomb lies in its anomalous architecture. Unlike the smooth, refined forms of the subsequent true pyramids or even the well-defined steps of Djoser, the Pyramid of Kui has a relatively small size and an unusual, as if clumsy shape. Its steps seem more primitive and less developed than Djoser's, and it may have been originally conceived as a kind of mastaba, which was then expanded and transformed into a step structure. This raises the question, was this a failed attempt to build a pyramid? Or was it an experimental form, a harbinger of what would later become the pinnacle of Egyptian engineering genius? The material of which it is built is mostly raw stone and raw brick, which makes it much less durable than the majestic stone structures of subsequent dynasties. Why was it that at such an early stage, when it would seem that the Egyptians were just beginning to experiment with monumental construction, they were already mastering such ambitious forms, but at the same time using relatively primitive materials and methods? This may indicate that pyramid building ideas developed in parallel in different regions or on the basis of different approaches, before reaching their culmination in Giza. Another deep mystery is the identity of Pharaoh Kui. Very little is known about it. His name does not appear in the main royal lists, such as the Turin Papyrus or the Abydos King list, which served as the basis for reconstructing the Egyptian chronology. This lack of references in official sources makes him a forgotten pharaoh, or a ruler whose reign was, for some reason, erased from history or simply not recorded. Was his reign too short to leave a significant mark? Was he a usurper whose name was deliberately ignored by all subsequent dynasties? Or did he rule during a period of political instability when the central authority was weakened and his legitimacy was not recognized throughout Egypt? The lack of information about him means that we do not know about his family, his deeds, his life, and his family roles in the development of Egypt. Kui's tomb is almost the only archaeological evidence of his existence, making him a figure surrounded by a halo of mystery. In addition, traces of looting were found inside the tomb, but some artifacts were preserved that may give a clue. For example, fragments of alabaster vessels and remains of funerary equipment, which, despite their scarcity, correspond to the style of the early ancient kingdom. It is also interesting that the orientation of the Kui tomb is not as precise as that of the subsequent pyramids, which also hints at the experimental nature of the construction and the gradual development of astronomical and geodetic knowledge. The mystery of the Kui tomb, with its unexpectedly ancient age, strange shape, and almost complete lack of information about its owner, challenges established models of the development of Egyptian civilization. It forces Egyptologists to re-examine the chronology, search for new evidence about early pharaohs, and explore the evolution of monumental construction in more depth, suggesting that the path to greatness for the Giza pyramids was much more complex, diverse, and full of trial and error than we might have imagined, and that many key figures from this early period are still hidden under the surface of the earth. The sands of time. The phenomenon of ancient Egyptian flying machines. Abydos in Saqqara, evidence of lost knowledge? In the minds of many people, ancient Egypt is associated with majestic structures, mummies, and hieroglyphs, but not with aviation or complex mechanisms that can fly. However, it is this idea that the ancient Egyptians had knowledge of air navigation or even flying machines that has given rise to one of the most controversial and intriguing mysteries based on the interpretation of several archaeological finds and images. The main evidence for this theory is the so-called Abydos hieroglyphs, which we mentioned earlier, but now we will consider them in a broader context, and the Bird of Saqqara, artifacts that seem to challenge our understanding of the technological level of the ancient civilization, hinting at the presence of lost or hidden knowledge. The Abydian hieroglyphs located on one of the friezes in the Temple of Seti are the most controversial. These images, which in certain lighting conditions and from a certain angle, are surprisingly reminiscent of a helicopter, a submarine, and something similar to an airplane or airship, became the basis for theories about paleo contact or about an ancient, highly developed civilization that preceded the pharaohs. Proponents of these theories point to the striking similarity of silhouettes with modern technology. Clearly distinguishable helicopter blades, the shape of the fuselage and wings of the aircraft. They argue that this can't be a coincidence or the result of simple erosion. If these are really images of flying machines, then how could the ancient Egyptians have known about them? Perhaps they saw such machines, created by some unknown civilization or arrived from another world, and captured them on their monuments. However, as already mentioned, Orthodox Egyptology explains this phenomenon as a palimpsest, the result of superimposing one inscription on another. In ancient times, it was common practice to redo inscriptions on stone, especially when one pharaoh wanted to rewrite history or add his own name. It is believed that the original inscription of Seti III was partially erased, and then his son, Rameses II, ordered to cut a new inscription on top of the old one. The combination of remnants of old and new hieroglyphs, according to Egyptologists, creates this optical illusion. But even with this explanation, the mere randomness of such a striking similarity to modern technology continues to cause bewilderment and surprise. How likely is it that exactly such figures accidentally matched if there was no prototype? Another equally mysterious artifact is the Bird of Saqqara, a wooden artifact discovered in the tomb of Padanami in Saqqara in 1898 and dating from about 200 BC, Ptolemaic period. This object, about 18 centimeters long, has the shape of a bird, but its wings are arranged unusually not horizontally, as in ordinary birds, but more vertically and have an aerodynamic profile similar to the wing of an airplane or glider. The tail is also unusual, resembling a vertical stabilizer. Proponents of the ancient Egyptian flying machine theory argue that the Titsa of Saqqara is a model of a glider or airplane, and not just a toy or decorative element. They point to its aerodynamic characteristics, which were tested in wind tunnels and showed the ability to fly. If this is true, it means that the Egyptians had a deep knowledge of aerodynamics that was completely unknown before the advent of modern aircraft. However, skeptics claim that this is only a stylized bird, possibly symbolizing the Horus falcon, and its aerodynamic properties are just an accident. The absence of any other evidence for the creation of aircraft in ancient Egypt is also a serious argument against this theory. These two riddles in Abydos hieroglyphs and the Bird of Saqqara continue to fuel interest in the idea of lost technology or hidden knowledge in ancient Egypt. Were these images and artifacts the result of random coincidences, optical illusions, and stylized art, as Egyptologists claim? Or are they the rare, miraculously preserved evidence that the Egyptians, or those who preceded them, possessed knowledge that surpassed our current understanding of their civilization? Perhaps these are just echoes of some early experiments, philosophical concepts, or even encounters with something that was so alien to their world that they could only portray it in their symbolic language. This mystery, which lies at the intersection of archaeology, linguistics, engineering, and ufology, is one of the most striking examples of how ancient artifacts can continue to challenge modern scientific research paradigms, forcing us to rethink the boundaries of what is possible in the ancient world. The mystery of the Book of the Dead, unsolved spells and secrets of the afterlife. Among the treasures of ancient Egyptian civilization passed down to us through the millennia, there is perhaps nothing more symbolic and at the same time mysterious than the so-called Book of the Dead. This is not a single book in the modern sense, but rather a collection of magical spells, hymns, prayers, and instructions designed to help the deceased on their dangerous and difficult journey through the Duat afterlife to eternal life in the fields of Yaru. Fragments of these texts, written on papyri, tomb walls, and sarcophagi, are found from the New Kingdom period, approximately 1550 BC, to the Ptolemaic era. Despite centuries of study, many aspects of the Book of the Dead remain unsolved, especially its profound theological and magical secrets, and how it functioned as a guide to the world of the dead. The main mystery of the Book of the Dead is its diversity and lack of a single, canonical version. There are more than 200 different spells, and none of the copies found contain all of them. Each copy was usually an individual order, created for a specific person, and included those spells and images that were considered most suitable for them. This raises the question, was there an original or complete set of these texts? Or was it a dynamic, ever-evolving tradition that adapts to changing beliefs and needs? How were specific stutterings chosen for a particular deceased? Were there any key spells that were considered absolutely necessary for a successful transition to the afterlife, and others that were secondary or optional? The lack of uniformity also makes it difficult to fully understand the overall narrative of the soul's journey, as different versions may emphasize different aspects or contain conflicting details. Another deep mystery is the magical power of these spells. The ancient Egyptians believed that simply knowing and reciting these texts, or even having them in the tomb, gave the deceased the power to overcome obstacles, drive away demons, transform into various deities, and ultimately achieve resurrection. But how did this magic work for them? Were they some sort of passwords for entering certain dimensions of the afterlife? Or did they have an internal, transformative power? Some spells contain very specific instructions, such as say this incantation 4 times, or draw this image on a linen bandage. This indicates a strict ritual practice, but does not explain its mechanism. Of particular interest are the chapters on transformation, where the deceased could take the form of birds, animals, or even gods to pass through the danger zones of the duat. These concepts go far beyond mere superstition and hint at the complex metaphysical understanding of being and the possibility of consciousness that we are just beginning to explore. In addition, the Book of the Dead is full of mysterious deities and demons, many of which are mentioned only in passing and do not appear in other, more well-known myths. Who were these creatures that inhabited the duat? Were they the personification of natural forces, inner fears? Or did they have a more specific mythological origin that was lost? Their descriptions are often vague and symbolic, making it difficult to identify them and understand their role in the soul's journey. Some images in the Book of the Dead also cause confusion. Strange creatures with many heads, grotesque figures, abstract symbols. Were they part of a visual language that we haven't fully deciphered yet? Or were they some kind of maps of the duat, symbolically representing its dangers and paths? Finally, the very process of creating the Book of the Dead is a mystery. How did scribes without access to the full reference text collect these spells? How did they ensure that they were correct and effective? Many copies contain errors and omissions, which may indicate difficulties in the knowledge transfer process. The mystery of the Book of the Dead is not just an archaeological or linguistic puzzle. It is a search for clues to the ancient Egyptians' deep beliefs about life after death, their ideas about the soul, the divine, and the other world. This is okay, but in their minds, which still remains partially closed, waiting for further research to reveal all their magical and philosophical secrets. The secret of the disappearance of Egyptian wisdom. Why did great knowledge not survive? Ancient Egypt was a civilization that reached incredible heights in various fields of knowledge, from architecture, engineering, and astronomy, to medicine, mathematics and chemistry, alchemy. Building pyramids, accurately predicting Nile floods, creating sophisticated astronomical calendars, performing surgical operations, developing sophisticated irrigation systems, using embalming to preserve bodies, and creating unique pigments and materials all attest to a deep empirical and theoretical understanding of the world. However, despite these astounding achievements, one of the greatest mysteries is why so much of this Egyptian wisdom seems lost to posterity, and why so much of this knowledge has not been fully developed, disappearing into history. Why didn't a civilization capable of building such colossal and precise structures leave us detailed engineering drawings or treatises on higher mathematics? One of the possible reasons for the disappearance of knowledge is its sacred and esoteric nature. Many of the most valuable knowledge, especially in the fields of architecture, medicine, and astronomy, could be kept in the strictest secrecy, passed down by word of mouth within priestly castes, master guilds, or even secret societies. If knowledge was considered a gift from the gods and was intended only for the chosen few, it was not widely recorded. With the fall of dynasties, the destruction of temples, and the persecution of the priesthood, especially during the Roman period and the spread of Christianity, this knowledge could be lost forever since there were no mechanisms for its widespread dissemination or preservation outside closed circles. Many temple libraries where valuable papyri were stored could have been destroyed as a result of wars, natural disasters, or just time. The Great Library of Alexandria, which could much of this knowledge, was unfortunately destroyed, which has become one of the greatest tragedies for human heritage. The second aspect of the puzzle is the form of recording and storage media. Much of Egyptian lore was recorded on papyri, which are extremely fragile materials and easily destroyed by humidity, fire, or insects. Although some texts were carved in stone, they were usually religious inscriptions or royal annals, rather than detailed scientific treatises. The lack of scientific books in our understanding that systematize knowledge in physics, chemistry, or engineering makes reconstructing their technologies extremely difficult. We are forced to collect information bit by bit from indirect sources, images, and preserved artifacts. Why didn't the Egyptians create more durable and systematic archives of their scientific discoveries if they were so advanced? Their education and knowledge transfer systems may have been based on practical training and oral tradition, making them vulnerable to disruption. The third reason may be related to cultural and political changes. With the arrival of the conquerors, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and then the Arabs, priorities, languages, and belief systems changed. Many ancient Egyptian practices and knowledge may have been considered obsolete, irrelevant, or even heretical by the new rulers. The Greekan, who came with Alexander the Great, brought their own, more systematic scientific approaches that could supplant or absorb Egyptian methods without always fully retaining their original form. Later, with the spread of Christianity and Islam, ancient pagan cults and related knowledge were actively suppressed, which led to the destruction of many sources. This process of cultural substitution could lead to the irreversible loss of entire layers of ancient Egyptian wisdom. Finally, there is the question of our own interpretation. Perhaps we just don't fully understand how the ancient Egyptians encoded their knowledge. Their scientific treatises may have been disguised as religious texts, as is suggested with the Book of the Dead or the symbol of the Eye of Horus. Or their methods were so unique and based on empirical experience that it is difficult to relate them to modern scientific methodology. The mystery of the disappearance of Egyptian wisdom is not just an academic question. It is a reminder of the fragility of human knowledge and how easily the great achievements of the past can be forgotten if there are no adequate mechanisms for preserving them and passing them on through generations and civilizations. This mystery continues to inspire the search for new papyri, the reinterpretation of old finds, and attempts to restore lost links in the chain of human development. The secret of the golden sarcophagus, unknown deposits and lost mining technologies. Ancient Egypt was known as the land of gold, and this precious metal has played a central role in its culture, religion, and economy for thousands of years. Gold symbolized divinity, eternity, and timelessness, making it an ideal material for making cult objects, funerary masks, sarcophagi, and jewelry for pharaohs and nobles. When Howard Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, the world was stunned by the quantity and quality of gold artifacts, especially the Akhenaten gold sarcophagus and funerary mask, which weighed hundreds of kilograms of pure gold. These findings, as well as references in ancient texts to untold gold riches, raise one of the greatest mysteries. Where did the ancient Egyptians get so much gold? Where were their main deposits? And what mining technologies allowed them to extract such volumes of metal for thousands of years? Most of the famous gold mines of ancient Egypt were located in the Eastern Desert, and especially in Nubia, modern Sudan, a region that itself received the name Nubia from the ancient Egyptian word nub, meaning gold. Ancient maps, such as the famous Turin Papyrus, the oldest known geological map, depict gold mines, roads to them, and even workers' dwellings. However, despite this information, many of these mines are now either exhausted or their scale does not correspond to the estimated volumes of gold produced, which forces us to look for additional deposits that have not yet been discovered. Did the Egyptians have other, now-forgotten sources of gold, perhaps located in even more remote and inaccessible regions of Africa? Or did they have methods that allowed them to extract gold from deposits that are considered unprofitable by modern methods? The main technological conundrum is related to the methods of gold mining. The Egyptians used both alluvial mining, washing gold sand and gravel from river sediments, and mine mining, extraction of gold from quartz veins in hard rocks. Alluvial mining, while effective for easily accessible deposits, quickly depletes them. Mining, on the other hand, requires much more effort. How could the ancient Egyptians, without iron tools, have penetrated deep into solid rock and crushed quartz veins to extract the smallest particles of gold? Using copper chisels and hammers and presumably fire to split the rock, the process would have been incredibly time-consuming and slow. The crushed rock was then washed with water to separate the gold. But how did they provide so much water in the arid conditions of desert mines? Were complex water supply systems used that are unknown to us? Evidence of the working conditions in these mines left by Greek historians describes them as hellish, where slaves and convicts died en masse from exhaustion, heat, and starvation, which may explain why many mines were quickly abandoned after the surface deposits were depleted. In addition to mining, there is a question about the methods of refining gold. To create such artifacts as the sarcophagus of Tutankhamun, high-grade gold was required, almost pure. How could the Egyptians have achieved such purity without complex chemical processes, such as lead cupping, although lead was used but its role in refining is not fully understood, or aqua regium, which were invented much later? Perhaps they used simpler but more effective methods based on knowledge of the properties of metals and various minerals, which we have not yet fully reconstructed. For example, ancient methods involved heating gold with various salts to remove impurities. However, the scale and quality of the final product remains impressive. Finally, the mystery of the golden sarcophagus. This is the secret of managing this huge resource. How did the pharaohs control such a vast and dangerous mining industry? How did they provide labor, food, and water for thousands of workers in remote desert areas? Gold was a monopoly of the pharaoh, and its production and distribution were strictly controlled by the state. It was a complex logistical and administrative system, the details of which we know only fragmentary. The mystery of gold deposits and mining technologies in ancient Egypt remains one of the biggest gaps in our understanding of this civilization. It hints at the presence of lost knowledge, more effective methods than we realize, and perhaps hidden sources that are still waiting to be discovered in the depths of the desert, waiting for new technologies to allow us to reveal all their secrets. The mystery of the builder's tomb, unusual burials and social structure. Among the thousands of tombs scattered throughout Egypt, from royal necropolises to modest burials of ordinary people, some stand out for their unusual nature and give rise to many mysteries about the social structure, rituals, and beliefs of the ancient Egyptians. Of particular interest are the so-called builders' tombs, found in the immediate vicinity of the Great Pyramids of Giza. These burials, found in the 1990s, do not belong to pharaohs or high-ranking nobles, but rather to simple workers and craftsmen who built these grandiose structures. However, contrary to the established ideas about slave labor, these tombs, their contents and location, reveal a completely different picture, full of surprises and deep questions about the social status, labor organization, and posthumous fate of those who built the Amida feast. The main mystery of the builders on tombs is their availability and relative comfort. If the pyramids were built by slaves, as has long been believed, then their burials, if they existed at all, would be massive and primitive. Instead, archaeologists found organized cemeteries with individual tombs, often with inscriptions indicating the names and even positions of those buried. Some of these tombs were decorated, contained funerary equipment, albeit modest, and skeletons indicate well-fed people who received medical care for injuries, which is completely different from the conditions of slaves. This indicates that the pyramid builders were free Egyptians, highly skilled artisans, stonemasons, overseers, and farmers who worked on the construction during the flood seasons of the Nile. This was a form of public service or taxation, but it was also considered honorable and allowed it to gain the favor of the pharaoh and a place next to him even after death. But how could Egyptian society organize such a large number of people, provide them with food, shelter, and medical care, without using slave labor in the usual sense? This indicates an incredibly developed system of logistics, personnel management, and social organization, which is still not fully understood. Another intriguing conundrum is the social hierarchy within the construction community. Tombs vary in size and quality, which indicates the existence of a complex hierarchy, from simple workers to high-ranking craftsmen and architects. Some tombs belong to masons' chiefs, workmasters, and pyramid builders' masters, which indicates their high status and specialization. This destroys the myth of the faceless mass of slaves. But how did this hierarchy function? What incentives were used to ensure this level of skill and dedication? Were there any other forms of reward besides food and shelter? It may have been a system based on religious belief in the divinity of the pharaoh and the promise of a better afterlife for those who helped him achieve immortality. However, the details of this social dynamic and reward system remain unclear. In addition, these tombs reveal details of the builders' daily lives. The remains of settlements with bakeries, breweries, kitchens, and even hospitals were found, where complex surgical operations were performed to treat injuries received on the construction site. This indicates a well-developed social support system. But were these settlements permanent or temporary? How often did your work shifts change? And what was the role of women and children in this community? The answers to these questions help to recreate a more complete picture of the lives of those who built the greatest structures of antiquity. The mystery of the tomb builders is not just an archaeological find. It is a radical reinterpretation of the role of the labor force in ancient Egypt, demonstrating their social status, skills, and deep faith. These burials refute myths and reveal a complex, well-organized civilization, where even ordinary workers could claim a worthy place in the afterlife and be immortalized next to the creations of their hands that still amaze the world. This mystery continues to inspire new research to uncover aspects of the life and posthumous fate of these forgotten heroes of ancient Egypt. The secret of the solar boat, of Cheops, technology and symbolism of movement in the afterlife. Next to the Great Pyramid of Cheops in Giza, in a deep underground chamber sealed for thousands of years, one of the most impressive and mysterious archaeological finds of ancient Egypt was discovered in 1954, the sunboat of Pharaoh Cheops. This huge, almost perfectly preserved wooden boat, disassembled into more than 200 pieces and carefully laid in a burial pit, is not just an ancient vessel, but a deeply symbolic artifact intended for the journey of the pharaoh in the afterlife. Its discovery and subsequent reconstruction have raised many questions about the purpose of such boats, their construction technology, and their role in the complex cosmology of the ancient Egyptians, making it one of the key pieces of evidence for their beliefs in engineering misery. The main mystery of the solar boat is its purpose and symbolism. Although it is often referred to as the sunboat, as it is believed that it was intended for the pharaoh to travel with the god Ra through the firmament, the exact meaning and function of these funerary boats remain a matter of debate. Was it a real boat that could float, or was it a purely ritual object that was never intended to be used on the water? Cheops' boat, built of cedar, a material that did not grow in Egypt, which indicates a developed trade, is more than 43 meters long and, by all indications, is a seaworthy vessel. This suggests that it may have been used for the actual journeys of the pharaoh during his lifetime, or more likely it was created as an ideal, functional soul ship that would carry him through the water barriers of the afterlife. If it was functional, how did the Egyptians build such large ships without using iron nails, connecting wooden elements with ropes, spikes, and grooves? This shows the incredible skill of the shipbuilders. Another deep mystery is related to other burial rooks discovered around the Pyramid of Cheops. Next to the first boat, a second one was found, not yet fully excavated and examined, and there is evidence of 3 or 4 other similar pits around the pyramid. Why did Cheops need so many rooks? Was each of them designed for a specific stage of the posthumous journey? Or did they symbolize various aspects of his royal authority and divine role? For example, one boat could be designed to travel through the sky with Ra, another boat could be designed to travel through the underground waters of the Duat, and the third boat could be designed to travel along the Nile in the pharaoh's earthly life, even after death. The lack of direct written sources explaining the functions of each of these rooks leaves room for interpretations and hypotheses based on mythological texts and indirect evidence. The mystery of the Sun Rook also affects construction and conservation technologies. The way the dismantled boat was placed in the burial pit is evidence of the Egyptians' deep understanding of conservation. The wooden parts were carefully stacked, and the pit itself was hermetically sealed, allowing the wood to survive in the desert conditions for more than 4,500 years. This is an amazing achievement. How were they able to take apart and label each of the 1,200 parts so precisely that they could be reassembled? And how did they know that just such a sealed environment would allow the tree to survive for thousands of years? This indicates empirical knowledge about the conservation of materials that was much more advanced than is commonly believed. The mystery of the solar boat of Cheops is not just an archaeological find, it is evidence of the deep, complex cosmology of the ancient Egyptians, their belief in eternal life and their desire to provide the pharaoh with everything necessary for a successful transition to the afterlife. It is also a striking example of their engineering genius in shipbuilding and conservation, which still continues to amaze and inspire new research to reveal all its symbolic and technological secrets. The secret of the burial place of Alexander the Great, the lost tomb and the eternal search. Among the many unsolved mysteries of ancient Egypt, one of the most intriguing is connected not with the pharaohs, but with the great conqueror who, having conquered Egypt, founded the famous Alexandria and was deified by its inhabitants, Alexander the Great. After his sudden death in Babylon in 323 BC, his body, according to legend, was mummified and taken to Egypt. His tomb, according to ancient authors, became a place of pilgrimage and one of the greatest treasures of the ancient world. However, despite centuries of searching and archaeological excavations, the exact location of the tomb of Alexander the Great still remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of history, generating endless speculation, legends, and never-ending attempts to find it. The main mystery is the contradictory evidence of ancient sources about its location and fate. Initially, after Alexander's death, his body was moved to Memphis, the ancient capital of Egypt. Then, on the orders of Ptolemy I Soter, one of his generals and the founder of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the body was moved to a new site, Alexandria. There, a majestic mausoleum known as Soma or Mnema was built for him, which became the central part of the royal quarter. Ancient authors such as Strabo describe it as a place of pilgrimage visited by Roman emperors, including Augustus, Caligula, and Septimius Severus, to pay homage to the great conqueror. Septimius Severus reportedly even ordered the tomb to be walled up to prevent further looting or desecration. After this, references to the tomb became increasingly rare and obscure, and by the 4th century AD, its exact location was unknown. It seems to have been lost to posterity. It may have been destroyed by earthquakes, floods, or unrest in Alexandria, or its location was deliberately concealed to protect it from looting, which was a common practice at the time. Another intriguing mystery lies in the debate over the fate of Alexander's body itself. Some legends say that his mummy was stolen, others that it was moved to another, even more secret place. Some sources even claim that the body was not mummified, but preserved in honey or wax, which, if true, is further evidence of advanced conservation techniques. If the tomb was sealed up by Septimius Severus, why couldn't it have been found in later centuries, when Alexandria was still a major city? Perhaps its entrance was so cleverly hidden that it merged with the surrounding buildings, or was buried under layers of subsequent construction and destruction. The search for the tomb of Alexander the Great continues for centuries. Many archaeologists, historians, and even adventurers have dedicated their lives to finding it. Various sites in Alexandria have been suggested as possible burial sites, from the Qam el-Din and Mustafa Kemal districts to ancient necropolises. Some archaeologists believe that it may be located under the modern mosque of the prophet Daniel, others that it should be searched in the Roman necropolis or even in the depths of the sea if part of the city went underwater in the aftermath of earthquakes. Every year, there are new sensational claims about the possible discovery of the tomb, but none of them has yet received convincing scientific confirmation. The mystery of Alexander the Great's tomb is not just a search for an archaeological site, it is a search for clues to the final resting place of one of history's greatest generals, and a testament to how quickly even the most grandiose monuments and histories can be lost in time, leaving only the echo of legends in an eternal search. The mystery of the builder's tomb, unusual burials and social structure. Among the thousands of tombs scattered throughout Egypt, from majestic royal necropolises to modest burials of ordinary people, some stand out for their unusual nature and give rise to many mysteries about the social structure, rituals, and beliefs of the ancient Egyptians. Of particular interest are the so-called builders' tombs found in the immediate vicinity of the Great Pyramids of Giza. These burials, found in the 1990s under the supervision of archaeologist Zahi Hawass, do not belong to pharaohs or high-ranking nobles, but rather to those who physically built these grandiose structures, ordinary workers, craftsmen, artisans, and overseers. However, contrary to the established ideas about slave labor, which have long been cultivated by popular culture and even some historical interpretations, these tombs, their contents, and carefully chosen location reveal a completely different picture of the social status, labor organization, and posthumous fate of those who built the pyramids. Their discovery radically changed our understanding of the structure of ancient Egyptian society and how one of the greatest construction projects in human history was organized. The main mystery of the builders' tombs is their availability and relative comfort, as well as their symbolic proximity to the pyramids themselves. If the pyramids were built by slaves, as has long been believed, then their burials, if they existed at all, would be massive, faceless, and primitive, devoid of any respect or individuality. Instead, the archaeologists found organized cemeteries with hundreds of individual tombs, many of which have inscriptions indicating the names, titles, and even positions of those buried. Some of these tombs were quite well made, with rough-hewn walls, but sometimes decorated with frescoes and contained burial equipment, although modest in comparison with the pharaonic tombs, but sufficient to provide in the afterlife. And skeletons indicate well-fed people who received even complex medical care for broken bones and injuries. Other injuries sustained on the construction site. This is completely different from the conditions of slaves, whose life would be short and their posthumous fate inglorious. On the contrary, these findings indicate that the pyramid builders were free Egyptians, highly skilled artisans, masons, overseers, and farmers who probably worked on the construction during the flood seasons of the Nile, when agricultural work was impossible. This was a form of public service, or a mandatory labor tax in favor of the state, but it was also considered honorable and allowed you to get the favor of the pharaoh and a worthy place in the afterlife, perhaps even next to him. This is evidence of an incredibly developed logistics system, personnel management, and social organization, which ensured not only the construction, but also the well-being of a huge number of people working on the project. Another intriguing conundrum is the complex social hierarchy within the construction community, which is reflected in the variety of tombs. Tombs vary in size, quality of processing, quantity, and type of burial equipment, which indicates the existence of a multi-stage hierarchy. From simple laborers who move stones to highly placed master masons, architects, engineers, foremen, and priests responsible for rituals. Some tombs belong to superintendents of masons, superintendents of works, overseers of pyramid builders, and masters of pyramid construction, which indicates their high status, specialization, and deep knowledge of their craft. This finally destroys the myth of the faceless mass of slaves and shows that the pyramids were the result of the labor of an organized, specialized, and motivated society. But how did this complex hierarchy function in such a huge project? What incentives were used to ensure this level of skill, precision, and dedication? Were there any other forms of monetary rewards beyond food, housing, and medical care? Perhaps it was a system based on a deep religious belief in the divinity of the pharaoh and the promise of a better afterlife to those who helped him achieve immortality and build his eternal home. Perhaps the honorific privilege of being buried next to the pyramid, was in itself a powerful incentive for the workers. However, the details of these complex social dynamics, reward systems, promotions, and shift arrangements remain unclear and are subject to further research. In addition, these tombs and the surrounding archaeological areas reveal details of the builders' daily lives. Remains of settlements were found with numerous bakeries capable of producing thousands of loaves of bread daily, breweries, kitchens, butchers, shops, and even specialized hospitals or infirmaries where complex surgical operations were performed, such as amputations or reduction of fractures that indicate a well-developed medical care system. This indicates a well-developed social support system and centralized supply. But were these settlements permanent or temporary, inhabited only during the construction season? How often did work shifts change? And how did such a huge mass of people rotate? And what was the role of women and children in this community? Many women were probably engaged in cooking, sewing, and other household tasks while maintaining infrastructure. The answers to these questions help to recreate a more complete and reliable picture of the lives of those who built the greatest structures of antiquity. The mystery of the builders. Tombs is not just an archaeological find, it is a radical reinterpretation of the role of the workforce in ancient Egypt, demonstrating their social status, skills, deep faith, and amazing ability to organize. These burials refute long-lived myths and reveal a complex, well-organized civilization where even ordinary workers could claim a worthy place in the afterlife and be immortalized alongside the creations of their own hands that still amaze the world. This mystery continues to inspire new research to uncover aspects of the life and posthumous fate of these undeservedly forgotten heroes of ancient Egypt. The secret of sunken cities Heraklion and Canopus, the lost gateway to Egypt. Beneath the waters of the Mediterranean Sea, off the coast of Egypt, are not just ruins, but entire sunken cities that were once thriving ports, centers of trade and religious life that played a key role in contacts between Egypt and the rest of the ancient world. Among them, a special place is occupied by the legendary cities of Heraklion, Thonis, and Canopus, whose ruins were discovered only at the beginning of the 1500th century by an expedition led by French archaeologist Frank Gaudio. These discoveries completely changed our understanding of the geography and trade relations of the Nile Delta in the late dynastic and early Ptolemaic periods, but at the same time gave rise to many new, unsolved mysteries about the causes of their death, the exact location of ancient coastlines, and the treasures that they still hide. The main mystery of sunken cities is the reasons for their immersion underwater. Heraklion and Canopus have flourished for many centuries, serving as Egypt's main seagate for all arrivals from Greece and the Mediterranean. Ancient authors such as Herodotus, Strabo, and Diodorus Siculus describe them as bustling, rich ports with majestic temples and thriving trade. However, around the 8th century AD, they gradually disappeared underwater, and their location was lost to history for more than 1,000 years. The main hypothesis about the causes of their death is a combination of earthquakes, tsunamis, and most importantly, soil liquefaction. The Nile Delta, which consists of loose alluvial deposits, is prone to subsidence. Powerful earthquakes, which often shook the region, could cause ground liquefaction, a process in which sand and silt underwater lose their bearing capacity, turning it into a solid substance, in a kind of liquid state, which led to the subsidence and sinking of massive buildings. Constant flooding and changes in the Nile bed may also have contributed to erosion and shoreline changes. However, the exact dates and sequence of these catastrophic events that led to their total flooding are still not fully understood. Was it a single catastrophic event or a slow, centuries-long process of immersion? How quickly did the inhabitants leave these cities? And why were there no attempts to demolish them or build new ones on more stable ground? Another intriguing mystery is the richness and variety of artifacts found. Hundreds of gold coins, jewelry, huge granite statues of pharaohs, gods, and queens, stelae with important inscriptions, as well as many everyday objects were recovered from the depths of the sea, which give us invaluable information about the trade, culture, and religious life of these cities. For example, in Heraklion, The ruins of the Grand Temple of Amun-Gareb, stele with decrees on taxes, sacred boats intended for processions, and hundreds of ancient Greek and Egyptian inscriptions were found. Discovered statues of colossal dimensions, some up to 6 meters in height, such as the statue of the god Hapi, are striking in their size and preservation. Why are there so many valuable artifacts left in the cities if the inhabitants knew about the impending catastrophe? It is possible that the dive occurred quickly enough, leaving no time for the evacuation of all property. Or many of these items were ritually placed in temples and could not be removed. The mystery of sunken cities is also linked to their strategic importance. Heraklion was not just a port, but a border and customs point, where all ships arriving from overseas had to first pass inspection and pay taxes. It was a kind of gateway to Egypt, which made it extremely important for the pharaohs and even for the Ptolemies. Canopus was famous for its temples dedicated to Osiris and Serapis, and was a center of religious pilgrimages, as well as a resort. Their disappearance underwater not only wiped them off the face of the earth, but also changed the logistics and economy of the region. How did these cities function as centers of mixed cultures? Egyptian, Greek, and then Roman. How did the inhabitants of these cosmopolitan centers interact with each other on a daily level? And how did their beliefs merge and transform with each other? The mystery of sunken cities, with their beautifully preserved ruins and thousands of artifacts, continues to be one of the most exciting destinations in underwater archaeology. It offers a unique insight into a world that has been lost for thousands of years and opens up new pages about the trade routes, cultural exchange, and geological instability of ancient Egypt, continuing to amaze with its discoveries and challenge our understanding of its ancient geography and history. The secret of the curse of the pharaohs, reality or hoax. Among the most famous and creepy mysteries of ancient Egypt, which go beyond archaeology and engineering, is the curse of the pharaohs. This concept, or rather legend, became widely known after the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, when several members of the Howard Carter expedition, as well as those associated with the find, suddenly died under mysterious circumstances. The pop culture press quickly picked up the idea, turning it into a fascinating story about the vengeful spirits of the pharaohs guarding their eternal rest. However, the sensational headlines hide a deep intrigue. Was the curse a real mystical phenomenon, a plot to protect tombs, or just a combination of circumstances reinforced by the human tendency to superstition? This question still divides scientists, mystics, and ordinary people. The main mystery of the curse of the pharaohs is the analysis of the deaths attributed to it. The most famous victim is Lord Carnarvon, who financed the Carter expedition. He died of pneumonia just a few months after the tomb was opened. Other deaths followed shortly thereafter. Carter's secretary, Richard Bethel, died of an unspecified illness. His father, Lord Westbury, committed suicide. And radiologist Archibald Reed, who took X-rays of the mummy, died shortly after returning to England. In total, about 24 deaths were recorded, one way or another related to the opening of the tomb. The proponent and the curses point to these coincidences as evidence of supernatural power, possibly caused by ancient incantations inscribed on tomb walls or papyri, which were meant to bring down misfortunes on those who dared to disturb the pharaoh's peace. The ancient Egyptians truly believed in the power of magic words and charms, and many tombs contained inscriptions calling for protection from robbers. Perhaps the priests developed special rituals unknown to us to ensure the eternal rest of their rulers. However, skeptics offer more rational explanations. In the first place, many of the dead, like Lord Carnarvon himself, were already old or in poor health. Carnarvon pneumonia, for example, could have been the result of a mosquito bite infected with erysipelas, as records indicate. Second, the number of deaths attributed to the curse is greatly exaggerated. Of the 58 people who were present at the opening of the tomb, only 8 died within 10 years, which is quite consistent with the mortality statistics for that time and demographic group. Sam Howard Carter, the chief intruder of the Pharaoh's Rest, lived another 16 years after the tomb was opened and died at the age of 64 from lymphoma. His assistant, Lady Evelyn White, who was one of the first in the tomb, lived for another 60 years. This significantly weakens the arguments about the ubiquitous and inescapable power of the curse. The third and most scientifically proven hypothesis is related to biological factors. Ancient tombs sealed for thousands of years could contain dangerous bacteria, mold, fungi, or viruses, which could be fatal for a person with a weakened immune system. For example, Aspergillus niger, black mold, which produces strong toxins, is often found in enclosed, humid spaces. Although it is deadly to a healthy person from birth, for a weakened body, it could cause serious respiratory diseases. In addition, the tombs could contain toxic gases produced by the decomposition of organic materials, mummies, plants, food, or fumes from natural minerals. Although their concentration in a well-ventilated, even if just opened, tomb would most likely be too low to cause immediate death. Skeptics also point out that the very idea of the curse was actively promoted by journalists who needed sensationalism to sell newspapers at the time. It was a brilliant marketing campaign based on ancient Egyptian mysticism and human fear of the unknown. Thus, the curse of the pharaohs remains a complex puzzle that combines psychological, historical, and possibly biological elements. Although the scientific community is mostly inclined towards a rational explanation, the belief in the mystical power of the curse continues to live on in popular culture, proving that some riddles of ancient Egypt have such a strong aura of mystery that they continue to affect our imagination, regardless of logical explanations. This story serves as a vivid example of how ancient beliefs and modern fears intertwine, creating legends that live longer than the civilizations that gave them birth. We pass through the labyrinth of the great mysteries of ancient Egypt, from colossal pyramids, whose construction methods are still controversial, to vanished cities buried under the waves of the sea, and mysterious papyri that store forgotten languages. Each of these mysteries, whether it is the question of the movement of multi-ton stones, the origin of the curse of the pharaohs, or the possible existence of lost technologies, opens before us not only a window into the past, but also doors for future research. These mysteries are not just academic puzzles. They are powerful reminders of the depth and complexity of an ancient Egyptian civilization that continues to challenge our modern understanding of history, science, and human capabilities. One of the fundamental reasons why these mysteries remain unsolved is the incompleteness of archaeological and textual data. Despite centuries of intensive excavation, vast areas of Egypt, especially vast deserts and underground layers, remain unexplored. Every year, new discoveries, such as the tomb of Kui or the sunken cities of Heraklion and Canopus, turn old ideas around, demonstrating that there are still many unsolved mysteries hidden under the sands and waters. The technologies we now have, such as satellite scanning, ground-penetrating radars, and robotics, allow us to look where an archaeologist might not have set foot before, promising new and even more amazing discoveries. Perhaps these new methods will allow us to find missing links in the history of pyramid construction, discover new gold mines, or decipher hitherto incomprehensible texts. Another important aspect is the interpretation of already known data. Ancient Egyptian texts, images, and artifacts often carry multi-layered meanings: religious, symbolic, and practical. Our modern rational thinking is not always able to fully understand the mentality of the ancient Egyptians, their beliefs that permeated all aspects of their lives, from construction to medicine. What seems technologically inexplicable to us may have been part of a ritual, a magical practice, or just ordinary knowledge that did not require detailed identification. For example, if the Book of the Dead is not just a collection of spells, but a kind of map of consciousness or a guide to metaphysical travel, then its true meaning can only be accessed with a completely different approach to interpretation. However, some of the lost knowledge did not disappear, but was encoded in their art, symbols, and architecture, waiting for us to learn to read these languages. In addition, these puzzles highlight the ability of the ancient Egyptians to innovate and adapt. They were not a static civilization. Over the millennia, they evolved, experimenting with new materials, methods, and ideas. From step pyramids to true ones, from brass tools to the use of harder stones, their history is full of trial and error, success and failure. The mystery of the unfinished obelisk is a vivid example of this. Their understanding of astronomy, geodesy, and mathematics was surprisingly high, which allowed them to create structures that still amaze with their precision. It was not just a primitive society that relied on brute force, it was a complex, highly organized, and intellectually advanced civilization. Finally, the Curse of the Pharaohs serves as a reminder of the power of legend and the human imagination. Regardless of scientific explanations, the mystique surrounding ancient Egypt continues to attract and inspire. It's part of the elusive aura that makes this civilization so appealing. Each unsolved mystery of ancient Egypt is not a sign of our inability to understand the past, but rather a challenge, a call to further research, to rethink and to recognize that even the most studied civilization can still hold an infinite number of secrets. The history of ancient Egypt is not a closed book. It is an ever-evolving narrative, each page of which, whether it is a new papyrus or a newly discovered tomb, continues to add new chapters to our understanding of this wonderful world. And of course, many more mysteries are waiting to be solved, changing our understanding of the past and inspiring future discoveries.